Hey everyone, welcome to Dr. Sleep. We love creating unique content for you, but we need your support now more than ever. Our channel is facing some challenges, and we really need your interaction. If you enjoy what we offer, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share our videos with your friends. Every comment, like, and share makes a huge difference. Let's grow together and keep bringing you the content you care about. Thank you for your continued support. The warehouse loomed against the night sky, an impossibly large structure of steel and concrete. The few exterior lights cast weak halos on the cracked pavement, barely illuminating the loading docks. It was just me and this monolith of storage, a fortress of forgotten things. I sighed and adjusted my security badge. First night. The job description was simple. Watch the place, report anything unusual, don't fall asleep. It seemed easy money. Inside, the warehouse was colder than it should be, the air thick with the scent of dust and something faintly metallic. My footsteps echoed too loudly as I made my way to the security booth, a small cabin near the main entrance. The previous guard had left in a hurry. His half-finished coffee sat abandoned on the desk, next to a clipboard of log entries scribbled in shaky handwriting. But the first thing I noticed was the letter. It was placed neatly in the center of the desk, bold black ink spelling out my name. Inside, the list of 10 rules made my stomach clench. Some crates are locked from the inside. Ignore any knocking. There will always be one more aisle than you remember. Do not enter the new one. If you hear something skittering above you, do not look up. One of the crates will smell like rotting meat. Do not get too close. The loading dock doors must remain closed. Something outside is waiting for them to open. Security cameras will sometimes show footage of previous guards. Do not investigate, stay in the cabin. If you drop something and hear no echo, leave the area immediately. Do not enter the storage aisles between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m. A second security guard will arrive at 4 a.m. Do not speak to them. We did not hire a second guard. At the end of your shift, check your reflection. If it doesn't blink when you do, don't leave the warehouse. It will escape with you. I exhaled sharply, my fingers tightening around the paper. This had to be a joke, right? Some kind of initiation prank for new hires? I glanced at the security monitors. The black and white feeds showed endless aisles of stacked crates, all identical. The only movement came from the occasional flickering light. Still, something about the air felt wrong. A noise broke the silence. Knock, knock, knock. A slow, deliberate rapping sound. From inside one of the crates, my blood turned to ice. The knocking came again. 3 steady raps from somewhere deep in the warehouse. I swallowed hard. This place was massive, stretching on for what felt like miles. There was no way someone could be inside a crate, right? But the sound wasn't an accident. It wasn't a random creak of shifting wood or metal. It was deliberate. I glanced at rule number 1 on the letter. Some crates are locked from the inside. Ignore any knocking. A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't a superstitious guy, but something about these words felt final, like ignoring them was the only way to survive. I turned away from the noise, forcing my focus on the security monitors. The screens flickered as I cycled through the aisles of crates, searching for any sign of movement. And then I saw it. On camera 4, one of the crates in aisle 17 shifted slightly. Not a lot, just an inch or two, as if something inside was pressing against the wood. I forced myself to breathe. The job wasn't worth this. I grabbed the warehouse radio, debating whether I should call my supervisor, but then I saw something worse. The crate on the screen moved again, but not from the inside this time. It tilted forward, like something unseen had pushed it from behind. I sat frozen as another sound echoed through the warehouse. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't knocking anymore. Something was trying to get out. I switched the monitor off. I didn't want to see it. I checked my phone. 12:15 a.m. Still hours to go. I told myself it was nothing. I just had to stick to the rules. Ignore the knocking. Ignore the movement. The moment I decided to stay put, the knocking stopped. Silence. I exhaled, forcing myself to unclench my fists. Maybe it really was just old wood shifting under temperature changes. And then, over the security intercom, a voice crackled through. Help me. The intercom buzzed with static. Help me. The voice was weak, almost a whisper. I stared at the intercom, my mind racing. No one else was supposed to be here. I reached for the radio, my hand shaking slightly. Who's there? Silence. The warehouse loomed around me, the stacked crates standing like tombstones in an industrial graveyard. The air felt heavy, thick with something unspoken and wrong. I forced myself to check the cameras again. My pulse hammered as I flipped through the aisles, searching for movement. And that's when I noticed it. There was an extra aisle. My heart lurched. That wasn't possible. When I started my shift, there had been 26 aisles, each labeled with a metal sign bolted to the walls. But on camera 6, past aisle 26, was a new row of crates, a 27th aisle that shouldn't exist. A cold sweat broke out along my back. Rule number 2. There will always be one more aisle than you remember. Do not enter the new one. I switched cameras, trying to see if it was a glitch, but the aisle was there on every feed. It hadn't been there before. I leaned closer. The space between the crates was unnaturally dark, the overhead lights failing to illuminate the aisle completely. And then, on the grainy black and white screen, I saw it. A figure, standing just inside the new aisle. I stopped breathing. It wasn't moving. It wasn't even facing the camera. Just a tall, human-like shape, featureless, standing too still in the darkness. The intercom crackled again. Help me! The same voice. My skin crawled. The voice wasn't coming from the intercom. It was coming from the figure on the screen. Something cold and instinctual inside me screamed to look away, to follow the rules. I reached out with a trembling hand and shut off the monitor. And then, from somewhere inside the warehouse, a slow, deliberate footstep echoed. Something was walking toward me. I sat frozen in my chair, my breathing shallow. The footstep had come from deep in the warehouse, somewhere past the loading docks. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, like something testing the ground before taking another step. I clenched my fists to stop my hands from shaking. Stay in the booth, follow the rules. The security monitors were off now, the screen a black void that felt safer than whatever had been watching me from that extra aisle. I forced myself to focus on the rules again. I checked the letter on my desk, running my eyes over the list. I was safe as long as I obeyed. And then I heard it, a soft, rapid skittering above me. My breath caught in my throat. It was fast, like the patter of multiple limbs crawling across the warehouse ceiling. The sound moved in bursts, a sudden erratic rush, then silence, then another scrambling of movement overhead. My stomach twisted. Rule number 3. If you hear something skittering above you, do not look up. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the edge of the desk. Don't look. Don't even think about looking. But the sound didn't stop. It circled the booth, darting from one end of the ceiling to the other. I pictured something long-limbed and inhuman, hunched in the rafters, crawling on too many hands. A bead of sweat rolled down my neck. Then suddenly it stopped directly above me. I clenched my jaw, willing myself not to react. I could feel it up there, as if it was waiting for me to break the rule. My entire body screamed to look, but I stayed frozen. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Then with a slow creaking sound, something began to lower itself from the ceiling. I didn't see it, but I felt it. The pressure in the air shifting, the unseen presence descending just out of my field of vision. It was trying to trick me, trying to make me break the rule. A single strand of something cold brushed against the top of my head. I bit down hard on my lip, forcing myself to stay still. My heart slammed against my ribs. And then, as quickly as it had come, the presence withdrew. The skittering resumed, darting back across the ceiling. Moments later, it was gone. I let out a shaky breath. I had followed the rule, but I was beginning to realize something. These rules weren't just guidelines. They were keeping me alive. I stayed in the booth for a long time, listening. The skittering had vanished, but the silence it left behind felt worse. I checked my watch. 1:47 a.m. Still hours until my shift ended. I forced myself to move, rolling my shoulders and flexing my fingers. If I sat here all night, I'd lose my mind. I had to at least make my rounds, check the aisles, and pretend I was doing my job. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the warehouse. The air felt different out here, heavy, like I had stepped into something's territory. Rows of identical wooden crates stretched into the distance, towering over me. My boots made soft thuds against the concrete floor as I walked. Then I smelled it. The stench hit me like a fist, thick and wet, like rotting meat left out in the sun. I gagged, covering my nose. The smell seeped into my lungs, thick and rancid. I scanned my flashlight across the crates, and then I found it. A crate in aisle 12 was leaking something. A dark, viscous fluid dripped from between the slats, pooling on the floor. The smell was coming from inside. I stumbled back as a wave of nausea rolled through me. Rule number 4, one of the crates will smell like rotting meat. Do not get too close. I turned away immediately. I didn't need to know what was inside. As I backed away, another sound broke the silence, a deep metallic groan. I spun toward the loading dock doors just in time to see them shudder against their locks. My breath hitched. Something was trying to get in. The massive steel doors rattled again, as if something was pushing against them from the outside. I stared, frozen. Then, from the other side of the doors, I heard it, a slow, rasping breath. Not human, not even close. I stepped back, my pulse hammering. The locks held, but the doors bulged inward, metal groaning under the pressure. It was big, whatever was out there, bigger than a man, bigger than anything that should exist. I fumbled with the flashlight, keeping my distance. The rule was clear. The loading dock doors must remain closed. Something outside is waiting for them to open. The doors shuddered one last time. Then, just as suddenly, the pressure eased. The breathing stopped. The thing outside had moved on. I backed away, swallowing hard. I wasn't sure if I was going to make it until morning. I practically ran back to the security booth, slamming the door shut behind me. My pulse thundered in my ears as I locked it. I needed to breathe, think. Something outside was waiting to get in, something big. But the doors held, for now. I wiped my sweaty palms on my uniform and forced myself to check the security monitors. Flickering black and white feeds showed the aisles stretching into the darkness. Crates stacked like forgotten relics. No movement. Then the footage on camera 3 changed. My stomach dropped. The screen no longer showed tonight's empty warehouse. Instead, it played old footage, grainy and distorted, like it had been recorded months ago. The timestamp in the corner read April 7th, 2023. I wasn't on the screen, but someone else was. A security guard sat at this very desk, staring at the monitors just like I was. His uniform was identical to mine, but his face was pale and sunken, dark circles etched beneath his eyes. Something felt wrong about him. I checked the rule list. Rule number 6, security cameras will sometimes show footage of previous guards. Do not investigate. Stay in the cabin. My fingers hovered over the radio, debating whether to turn the feed off. Then the guard on the screen looked up. Not at the monitors, at me. My breath hitched. He wasn't supposed to do that. His eyes locked onto mine through the screen. His lips moved, forming silent words I couldn't hear. I scrambled to turn the monitor off, but my fingers fumbled against the controls. The footage jumped, skipping like an old VHS tape. Now the guard wasn't sitting anymore. He was standing directly in front of the security booth window. But when I glanced at the actual window behind me, no one was there. I whipped back around to the screen. He was still standing outside the booth in the footage, hands pressed against the glass, lips moving faster now, repeating something over and over. I leaned in closer, my pulse hammering. I could almost read his lips. Don't turn around. The blood drained from my face. The room suddenly felt too small. The air behind me shifted, like someone was standing there. I gripped the desk. Don't turn around, don't break the rule. A single breath brushed the back of my neck. Something was right behind me. I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to move. Then the security monitor shut off, and just like that, the air behind me was empty again. I released a shaky breath. The warehouse was testing me. I had almost failed. I didn't move for a long time. The air in the security booth felt thick, like it was holding something invisible. I kept my hands clenched on the desk, afraid that if I let go, I'd somehow slip out of reality and into whatever space the other guard had gone. Finally, I forced myself to breathe. I needed to focus. I needed to get through this shift. I glanced at the clock, 2:55 a.m. Something about that time bothered me. I checked the rule list again. Rule number 8, Do not enter the storage aisles between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m. 15 minutes. That's all I had to survive. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and reached for my flashlight. My fingers trembled as I grabbed it. I needed to do another round. Sitting in this booth was making me lose my mind. Stepping outside, the warehouse felt different. The silence wasn't normal silence. It was too deep, like I had walked into an empty world where sound didn't exist. My boots thudded against the concrete as I made my way down aisle 14, scanning the crates. Then my flashlight slipped from my grip. I instinctively flinched, waiting for the sound of it hitting the floor. But there was nothing, no echo, no clatter, just dead silence. My throat closed up. Rule number 7, if you drop something and hear no echo, leave the area immediately. I spun on my heel and walked back toward the security booth. Not too fast, not too slow. I didn't look around. I didn't let my brain process the fact that my flashlight was gone. I reached the booth and slammed the door shut behind me, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. 2:59 a.m. I barely had time to process what just happened before the lights flickered. Then the clock ticked over to 3 a.m. The entire warehouse shifted. The walls breathed, stretching in ways they shouldn't. The aisles elongated, stretching into impossible corridors. The crates shuddered, vibrating like something inside was waking up. I felt it, a pressure in the air, something watching. A low, distant groan echoed through the warehouse like the bones of the building were moving. Something was coming. I curled into myself, gripping the edge of the desk. I had one job: stay inside the booth, do not enter the aisles. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed the rule would hold. Outside, something massive walked through the aisles, its footsteps reverberating through the walls. I didn't move. I just had to survive 15 minutes. I kept my head down, gripping the desk like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. The warehouse groaned around me, stretching in ways that defied logic. The thing outside was still moving. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed through the aisles. They didn't sound human. The lights flickered again, buzzing like dying insects. 3:07 a.m. Almost there. Just 8 more minutes. A shadow passed by the security booth window. I clamped my eyes shut. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Another step. Closer this time, 3:09 a.m. The thing in the warehouse let out a low, rattling breath. It was waiting, testing me. I stayed frozen, barely daring to breathe. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the pressure lifted. The air normalized. The aisles stopped shifting. The clock clicked over to 3:15 a.m. And just like that, it was gone. I sat there, heart slamming against my ribs. I had survived. I took a shaky breath, rubbing my face. Only 1 more hour until my shift ended. Then I heard the door click open. I snapped up from my chair. A man in a security uniform stepped into the booth. I went cold. Rule number 9, a second security guard will arrive at 4 a.m. Do not speak to them. We did not hire a second guard. I glanced at the clock. 3:59 a.m. He was early. The man was tall, too tall, his uniform hanging a little too loose, like it didn't quite fit him. His skin was wrong, like something had stretched it over a frame that wasn't human. He smiled at me. It wasn't comforting, it was too wide, his teeth too white and even. I stayed silent, my hands gripping the arms of my chair. The knot guard tilted his head, studying me. "Quiet night?" he asked, voice calm, too smooth. I didn't answer. His smile stretched wider. "You're the first one to follow the rules," he said. "Most of them try to talk to me." I clenched my jaw. He took a slow step forward, tapping the desk with 2 long fingers. Then he leaned in close. His breath smelled wrong, like damp earth and something rotting just beneath the surface. They never last. The clock ticked over to 4:01 a.m. The second guard's smile disappeared. He stepped back, his entire body twitching like something inside him had just been denied access. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The moment he was gone, my body sagged with relief. I had almost spoken, almost broken the rule. One more test remained. The reflection check. The security booth felt too empty now. The second guard had left, but I could still feel him, or rather the thing that had worn his skin. I exhaled shakily and checked the clock. 4:10 a.m. My shift would be over soon. Just a few more minutes and I could leave. Escape this place. But there was one last rule. I stared at the list on my desk, my eyes locked on the final instruction. Rule number 10, at the end of your shift, check your reflection. If it doesn't blink when you do, don't leave the warehouse. It will escape with you. A knot of dread coiled in my stomach. I hadn't thought much about this one before. The other rules were about avoiding things, not testing them, but this one forced me to look. I turned my head slowly toward the small mirror mounted on the wall of the booth. It was a cheap thing, scratched and worn, just big enough to show my face and shoulders. I swallowed hard and stepped closer. My reflection looked normal. Sweaty skin, wide eyes, the slight tremble in my hands. I looked like a guy who had just survived the worst night of his life. I let out a breath. "Okay," I whispered. "Just a test, My reflection smiled. My real face hadn't moved. A sick, icy terror flooded my veins. I blinked. My reflection didn't. It just stared at me, its mouth stretching wider and wider, its teeth sharper than mine should be. I stumbled back. No. My own face was wrong. Something else was looking through my skin. I turned away from the mirror, trying to catch my breath. What do I do? The rules hadn't said how to fix this. They only said one thing. If it doesn't blink, don't leave the warehouse. It will escape with you. I turned back, my body trembling. The thing in the mirror still hadn't blinked. It was waiting for me to make a mistake. The warehouse doors were right there. My car was outside. I could just run, but I knew if I stepped outside, it wouldn't be me leaving. I clenched my fists. My reflection tilted its head, mocking me. I had one choice: stay in the warehouse, or risk letting whatever I had become walk free. I stood frozen, staring at the mirror. The thing wearing my reflection stared back. It hadn't blinked, not once. I could hear my own ragged breathing, feel my pulse hammering in my chest. But my reflection? It wasn't breathing at all. The warehouse doors were right there. My keys were in my pocket. If I just walked out, I could pretend none of this happened. But that wasn't me in the mirror. And if I left, it would leave too. My body trembled as I backed away. I clenched my fists, fighting every urge to bolt for the exit. I had followed every rule tonight, every single one, but now I was trapped. The reflection grinned wider, its teeth stretching too far, too sharp. I squeezed my eyes shut. Think, there has to be a way out. I glanced at the rule sheet again. The rules only told me what not to do. They never said how to fix it. The clock read 4:27 a.m. My shift was almost over. I took a step forward, forcing myself to face the mirror again. The thing inside it tilted its head as if studying me. I inhaled deeply. If it was copying me, maybe. I raised my right hand. The reflection raised its left. Not a mirror image. A cold shudder ran down my spine. It wasn't me at all. I had one chance. I raised both hands and slammed the mirror off the wall. The glass shattered, pieces raining onto the floor. For a moment there was nothing, just the sound of my own breathing. Then a horrible, ear-splitting scream erupted from the broken shards. Not human, not even close. I stumbled back as the glass began to ripple like the surface of a pond, and from the largest fragment something moved. A black hand, too long, too thin, reached up from the shards, clawing its way out. I didn't wait to see what followed. I bolted for the exit, sprinting across the warehouse floor. Behind me the thing shrieked, its voice warping, echoing, turning into something inhuman. I reached the doors and threw them open, bursting into the freezing night air. The second my feet hit the pavement, the sound stopped. I turned back, heart pounding. The warehouse was silent again. The reflection was gone. I didn't know if I had trapped it inside or set it free in a different way, but I wasn't staying to find out. I climbed into my car, hands still shaking, and drove away without looking back. I didn't quit the next day. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, I still wonder what would have happened if I had stepped outside, or if it had blinked first. I've always been cautious about the internet. You hear stories, urban legends really, about what happens when you delve too deep, but I never thought I'd be one of those stories. This isn't some wild tale with demons or monsters. It's a cold, unsettling truth that's been gnawing at me every day since it happened. And if you take anything from this, it should be to stay away from the dark web. Seriously, it all started about a year ago. I was bored, stuck at home during one of those endless weekends where nothing seemed to pass the time. I'd always been fascinated by the darker corners of the internet, not in a morbid way, but out of sheer curiosity. It was like a forbidden fruit. The dark web, people said, was where you could find anything: drugs, weapons, even hitmen. I had no intention of engaging in any of that, of course. I was just curious. One night, after hours of scrolling through the same old memes and YouTube videos, I decided to explore. I'd heard about Tor, the browser that could take you places Google never could, and I figured, why not? It felt almost like a game, like I was breaking the rules in some harmless way. After setting everything up, I found myself on the dark web. The first thing that hit me was how different it was from what I'd imagined. There were no flashy graphics, no ads or pop-ups, just plain old-school HTML pages with basic links. It was quiet, eerie even. I told myself I was just looking, not touching anything. I wandered through various forums, reading posts that ranged from the bizarre to the downright creepy. Then I stumbled upon a discussion thread titled, "How well do you know your neighbors?" It was a seemingly innocuous topic, something you'd find on any normal forum. But something about it felt off, almost like the words had a hidden meaning. Without thinking, I clicked on the link. Inside, people were discussing the most mundane things: what their neighbors did for a living, the cars they drove, the times they left and came back. At first, I thought it was just a bunch of nosy people with too much time on their hands. But as I read on, I realized that the posts were getting more detailed. People were sharing specific addresses, talking about the routines of the people living there. It made my skin crawl. But then I made the mistake. In a moment of reckless curiosity, I posted a reply. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted to prove that I could be as observant as the rest of them, that I could blend in. I shared a small detail about a neighbor of mine. It was nothing significant, just that he took his dog for a walk at 6 a.m. every morning, like clockwork. Immediately after posting, I felt a surge of regret. What had I done? But it was just one detail, right? Nothing that could identify me or my neighbor. Besides, what could really happen? For a few days, nothing did happen. Life went on as usual. I almost forgot about that stupid post. But then, weird things started happening. It began with small things you wouldn't normally notice unless you were paying close attention. One morning I went outside and found my mailbox open. The contents had been rifled through, but nothing was missing. I chalked it up to a prank by some neighborhood kids. But then it happened again the next day, and the next. Then one evening, I noticed a car parked across the street. It wasn't unusual to see cars on the road, but this one never seemed to leave. It just sat there, engine off, windows dark. I could feel someone watching me from inside, but I couldn't be sure. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I didn't mention it to anyone. A week later, I received a package. It was just sitting on my doorstep, no return address. I hadn't ordered anything, so I was confused. I opened it, and inside was a single sheet of paper with one line written on it. "We know who you are." My heart dropped. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the room. My first thought was that this was some kind of sick joke. Maybe one of my friends found out about my dark web escapade and decided to mess with me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. None of my friends knew, and even if they did, they wouldn't go this far. Panic set in. I started noticing more things. Shadows that seemed to move. People standing just a little too close. The car across the street never left. It was always there, like a black hole, sucking away any sense of normalcy I had left. That's when I decided to go back to the forum. I thought maybe I could delete the post, or at least figure out who was behind this. But when I tried to log in, I couldn't. My account was gone, like it never existed. I searched for the thread, but it was nowhere to be found. It was as if the whole thing had been erased, leaving no trace. And then, the phone calls started. They were always at odd hours, from unknown numbers. At first, there was just silence on the other end, but eventually, I started hearing breathing, heavy and slow, like someone was listening, waiting for me to speak. I never did. I'd just hang up, my hands shaking. But the worst part was when I started seeing people who didn't belong. They'd appear out of nowhere, just standing at the end of my street or across the parking lot at work. They never approached me, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold and unblinking. One night I got home from work and found my front door ajar. I was sure I had locked it that morning. My heart raced as I stepped inside, every nerve on edge. Nothing seemed out of place, but I knew someone had been there. It was the feeling you get when you know you're not alone, even when you can't see anyone. I checked every room, every closet, but found nothing. Then on my bedroom wall, I saw it. Written in what looked like red lipstick was a single word: soon. That's when I knew this wasn't just some prank. This was real. They knew where I lived, they knew who I was, and they were watching me. I had crossed a line, and now I was paying the price. I wanted to go to the police, but what could I tell them? That I posted something on a dark web forum and now I was being stalked? They'd laugh me out of the station. I was trapped, alone with my fear, waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's how part 1 ends. Part 2 is when things start to get really bad. Trust me, if you think this was unsettling, you haven't seen anything yet. If you take one piece of advice from my story, let it be this: never, ever reveal even the tiniest detail about yourself on the dark web, because once they have that, they have everything. I barely slept after that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind had me on edge. My mind was spinning with possibilities. Who were these people, and why were they targeting me? I thought back to that tiny detail I had shared on the dark web. Could something so small really have triggered all of this? The next morning, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The car that had been parked across the street for days was gone, but in its place was something even more unsettling: a single black envelope on my front porch. It was just lying there, waiting for me. I hesitated, my hand hovering over it. Part of me didn't want to open it, to see what fresh horror it contained, but I knew I had no choice. With shaky fingers, I tore it open. Inside was another note, written in the same scrawled handwriting as the message on my wall. "You can't hide from us." I felt like I was being suffocated by fear. Whoever these people were, they were serious, and they were relentless. It was like they were playing a game, pushing me further and further, waiting to see when I would break. But what could I do? Going to the police seemed pointless. Even if they believed me, what could they do against faceless strangers on the internet? My friends and family couldn't help either. I couldn't drag them into this nightmare. So I did the only thing I could think of. I tried to disappear. I stopped going to work, telling my boss I was sick. I unplugged my computer and phone, hoping to cut off any way they could track me. I even packed a bag and considered leaving town for a while, but something told me it wouldn't matter. No matter where I went, they would find me. Days turned into a blur. I barely ate, barely slept. The silence in my house was deafening, but at the same time, I was terrified of what I might hear if I turned on the TV or radio. Every time I looked out the window, I half expected to see someone standing there, just waiting for me to make a move. And then one night, it happened. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when I heard it, a soft tapping sound like someone gently knocking on glass. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized it was coming from my bedroom window. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, as if whoever was outside knew I was listening. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, just lying there and pretending I didn't hear anything. But I knew that wouldn't work. They weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted, whatever that was. Summoning every bit of courage I had left, I got out of bed and approached the window. My hand trembled as I reached for the curtain, pulling it aside just enough to peek out. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing outside, cloaked in shadow. I couldn't make out any features, but I could see the outline of a person, tall, with broad shoulders. They were just standing there, staring at me through the glass, their face hidden in darkness. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I could feel their eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. It was like they were daring me to do something, to make the first move. But I was paralyzed with fear, rooted to the spot. Then, without warning, the figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. The tapping stopped, leaving me in suffocating silence once again. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to process what had just happened. Why didn't they break in? What were they waiting for? It was like they were playing with me, like a cat with a mouse, seeing how far they could push before I snapped. After that night, things escalated quickly. The following day I received another package, but this time it wasn't just a note. Inside was a small black USB drive. My hands trembled as I stared at it, debating whether to plug it into my computer. But I had to know what they were trying to tell me. I connected the drive to my laptop, half expecting it to be some sort of virus. But what popped up on my screen was far worse, a video file titled, "Watch Me." Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The video was short, only about 30 seconds long. It was a recording of my house taken from across the street. The camera zoomed in slowly, focusing on my front door, then panning up to my bedroom window. It was from the night before when I had heard the tapping. My stomach churned as I realized what this meant. They had been recording me the whole time, watching my every move. But that wasn't the worst part. As the camera zoomed in on my window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the corner of the frame, was a reflection of me, standing in front of the window, staring out at the shadowy figure. And behind me, in the darkness of my room, was another figure, barely visible but unmistakably there, watching me from the shadows. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding in my chest. This was no longer just a game. Whoever these people were, they had been inside my house, standing just a few feet away from me while I was completely oblivious. They could have done anything to me and I wouldn't have known until it was too late. I felt sick to my stomach, fear gnawing at me from the inside out. They were toying with me, making sure I knew just how powerless I was. But why? What did they want from me? I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers and I needed help. But as I reached for my phone to call the police, it buzzed in my hand. A new text message from an unknown number. "Don't call them. We're watching." My heart sank. They had thought of everything. I was completely trapped with no way out. And as much as I wanted to believe this was all just some sick joke, the evidence was right there in front of me. This was real, and it wasn't going to end until they got what they wanted. But what could that possibly be? As I sat there paralyzed with fear, I realized that this was far from over. Whoever they weren't going to stop until I was completely broken, until they had taken everything from me. And as much as I hated to admit it, I knew they were winning. After that last message, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The lines between what was real and what was imagined began to blur. I didn't know who I could trust. Every face on the street, every car that passed by felt like a potential threat. My own home, once a sanctuary, had become a prison. I was living in a constant state of fear, jumping at every noise, checking over my shoulder at every turn. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, even though I couldn't see anyone. It was as if the shadows themselves were closing in on me, suffocating me with their silent presence. Desperation pushed me to do something I had sworn I wouldn't. I reached out to the internet. Not the dark web this time, I wasn't that stupid, but regular forums, places where people shared their own unsettling experiences. I needed to know if anyone else had gone through something similar, if anyone had found a way to escape. But what I found only deepened my despair. Most of the responses were dismissive, people calling me paranoid or telling me to just unplug everything and move on with my life. But then there were others, those who claimed they had been through something similar and barely made it out. Their advice was simple but chilling. Once you're marked, there's no escape. One message stood out from the rest. It was from a user with a cryptic username, someone who seemed to know more than they were letting on. They didn't offer much in the way of comfort, but their words sent a chill down my spine. You need to give them what they want. It's the only way they'll leave you alone. But what did they want? I still had no idea. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that was probably the point. They wanted to keep me guessing, keep me on edge, until I cracked. Days passed, each one worse than the last. I was a wreck, barely sleeping, barely eating. The messages kept coming, each one more ominous than the last. They would tell me things like, "We see you," or "We're getting closer." It was like they were taunting me, enjoying my descent into madness. Then one evening I received a package in the mail. Unlike the previous ones, this one was much larger, wrapped in plain brown paper. My name was scrawled across the front in the same messy handwriting that had haunted my dreams. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct screamed at me to just throw it away, to pretend it didn't exist. But I knew that wasn't an option. Ignoring them would only make things worse. With trembling hands, I unwrapped the package. Inside was a small black box. It was unmarked, with no distinguishing features. Just a simple box, sitting there like Pandora's box, waiting to unleash whatever horrors it contained. I hesitated, but I knew I had to open it. Slowly, I lifted the lid. Inside was a small, nondescript item, a key. It looked old, with a tarnished surface and a worn handle, like it had been used many times before. But there was no note, no instructions, just the key lying in the box. Confusion washed over me. What was this for? What did it mean? I turned the key over in my hand, searching for some kind of clue. But there was nothing. It was just a key. But a key to what? I didn't have long to wonder. That night my phone rang again. Another unknown number. My heart raced as I answered, half expecting to hear the same heavy breathing that had plagued me before. But this time, there was a voice. "Use the key," it said. The voice was low, almost a whisper, distorted like it was being masked by some kind of software. "Use the key, and it'll all be over." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my mind racing. Use the key, but where? How was I supposed to figure that out? I spent the next few days scouring my house, looking for any place the key might fit. I checked every lock, every drawer, every hidden nook and cranny, but nothing matched. It was like they were playing a twisted game, watching me run around in circles while they waited in the shadows. And then, one night, I found it. I was in the basement, a place I rarely visited. It was cluttered with old boxes and forgotten items, a dusty reminder of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I had almost given up when I noticed something odd. A small metal door set into the wall, half hidden behind an old shelf. It was about the size of a safe deposit box, and it had a keyhole. My heart pounded as I knelt down in front of it, the key clutched in my shaking hand. This had to be it. This was what they wanted me to find. But what would happen when I opened it? Was this really the end, or just another layer of the nightmare? Taking a deep breath, I inserted the key into the lock. It turned easily, the mechanism clicking into place with a sound that echoed through the basement. Slowly, I pulled the door open. Inside was a small, cramped space, barely large enough to fit anything of significance. But there, in the center, was another box. This one much smaller, about the size of a jewelry case. It was made of the same black material as the first, smooth and featureless. I reached inside and lifted the box out, my hands trembling. I knew this was it, the answer I had been searching for, the key to whatever twisted game they were playing. but I wasn't prepared for what I found inside. As I opened the box, I was met with a shock of bright light. I blinked, trying to adjust to the sudden brightness, but it was no use. The light was too intense, too blinding. I stumbled back, dropping the box as the light consumed the room, filling every corner with its brilliance. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the light vanished. I blinked, disoriented, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But when I looked down, the box was gone. In its place was a small, handwritten note, the words scrawled in the same familiar handwriting. "Now you know." My heart raced as I picked up the note, my mind reeling. What did this mean? What was I supposed to know? But before I could even begin to process it, the lights in the basement flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, desperate for some kind of light, but it was dead. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I was completely alone, trapped in the dark with no way out. The walls seemed to close in around me, the air growing thick with a suffocating sense of dread. By now, sleep had become a distant memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel that presence from the basement, lurking just out of sight. The note had said, "Now you know," but the truth was, I knew nothing. I was more lost than ever, stumbling through a nightmare that refused to end. I began to suspect that maybe this was the point. Maybe the confusion, the fear, the constant feeling of being watched was all part of their plan. Whoever was behind this wanted to break me down piece by piece, to push me past my limits until I was nothing but a hollow shell. And if I didn't find a way out soon, they were going to succeed. The next morning, I decided to get out of the house. Staying cooped up inside was driving me insane, and I needed to clear my head. I packed a small bag, grabbed my keys, and drove to the one place I thought I could find some peace, a secluded cabin my family owned, miles away from the nearest town. It wasn't much, just a simple, old-fashioned cabin in the woods, but it was quiet, isolated, and most importantly, off the grid. The drive there was nerve-wracking. Every car I passed, every person I saw, felt like they were part of the conspiracy. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone tailing me, but no one followed. By the time I reached the cabin, my nerves were frayed, but I felt a small sense of relief. At least here, I could finally breathe. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it, rustic, with creaky wooden floors and the faint smell of pine. There was no internet, no cell service, just the quiet rustle of the trees and the distant sound of a stream. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of calm. Maybe this was what I needed, a break from the madness, a chance to gather my thoughts and figure out what to do next. I spent the first day just trying to relax. I went for a walk in the woods, took deep breaths of the fresh air, and tried to convince myself that I was safe. But even here, in this peaceful place, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was like a dark cloud hanging over me, a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. That night, I decided to try something I hadn't done in a long time: meditate. It was something I used to do when life got overwhelming, a way to center myself and push out the noise. I sat down on the wooden floor, closed my eyes, and focused on my breathing, trying to clear my mind of all the fear and anxiety that had taken root. For a few minutes, it worked. I felt my body relax, my thoughts quieting as I focused on the rhythm of my breath. But then, just as I was starting to find some peace, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone gently knocking on wood. My eyes snapped open, and my heart leaped into my throat. The sound was coming from outside the cabin near the front door. I stayed perfectly still, straining to listen, but the tapping continued, slow and deliberate. I knew I should stay inside, that I shouldn't investigate, but something compelled me to move. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear, but I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I had to know who or what was out there. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made my way to the door. My hand shook as I reached for the knob, and for a moment I hesitated. But then, with a deep breath, I swung the door open and shined the light into the darkness. There was nothing there, just the empty porch, the trees swaying gently in the night breeze, and the soft chirping of crickets. I stepped outside, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement, but everything was still. And then I saw it, another black envelope lying on the wooden steps of the porch. My heart sank as I picked it up, the familiar dread washing over me. I already knew what I'd find inside, but that didn't make it any easier to open. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper with the same scrawled handwriting as before, "You can't run." I felt a chill run down my spine. Even here, in the middle of nowhere, they had found me. There was no escape, no safe place to hide. They were always watching, always one step ahead. And no matter where I went, they would follow. But that wasn't the worst part. As I stared at the note, a realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The words weren't just a threat, they were a command. Whoever was behind this didn't want me to run anymore. They wanted me to stay put, to play their game until the very end. And that's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let them break me. If they wanted me to stay, then I would stay, but I wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. I was going to find out who they were and why they were doing this to me. And when I did, I was going to put an end to it, once and for all. I spent the next few hours going through everything I knew, every clue I had gathered since this nightmare began. The messages, the packages, the mysterious key, they all pointed to something, but I couldn't see the full picture yet. There had to be a reason they had singled me out, a reason why they were so intent on driving me to the brink of madness. And then, as I was sifting through the papers I had brought with me, I found something I had almost forgotten about. The black USB drive. The one with the video of me in the window. I had been too terrified to watch it again after the first time. But now, with fresh determination, I plugged it into my laptop. The video started the same as before, the same eerie footage of my house, the same zoom in on my bedroom window. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, an anomaly in the reflection, something small and barely noticeable, but there nonetheless. I paused the video and zoomed in, my heart racing. There, in the corner of the window, was a faint outline of a face. It was hard to make out any details, but it was unmistakable. Someone had been standing right behind me that night, watching me watch them. But who were they? And why hadn't I noticed them before? I played the video again, this time focusing on the face in the reflection. It was blurry, distorted by the glass. But the more I stared at it, the more familiar it seemed. There was something about the shape of the face, the way it hovered just out of sight, that triggered a memory, a fleeting image buried deep in my subconscious. And then it hit me. The face in the reflection. It was mine. My heart skipped a beat as the realization sunk in. The person in the video wasn't just someone watching me. It was me. But how was that possible? How could I be in two places at once? I rewound the video, playing it over and over, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But the more I watched, the more confused I became. It didn't make any sense. It was like some kind of twisted trick, a mind game designed to make me question everything I thought I knew. But then, a thought occurred to me, one so terrifying that I almost couldn't bear to consider it. What if this wasn't just a video? What if this was a warning? A glimpse into what was going to happen if I didn't find a way to stop them? As I sat there staring at the screen, a sense of dread washed over me. Whoever was behind this was playing a game, and I was the pawn. They wanted me to think I was in control, to believe that I could outsmart them. But the truth was, they had been in control all along. They had been manipulating me from the very beginning, pushing me toward some unknown end. And if I didn't figure out what they wanted, I was going to lose. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The cabin, once a place of refuge, now felt like a trap. The walls seemed to close in around me, the darkness pressing down like a weight on my chest. And then, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it again, the soft, rhythmic tapping. But this time, it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the cabin, just down the hall. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, like someone was knocking on the walls, getting closer and closer. I wanted to run, to get as far away as possible, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The tapping stopped just outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, waiting for the worst, but nothing happened. The silence was deafening, the air thick with tension. And then, slowly, the door creaked open. I couldn't see who or what was standing there. The darkness was too thick, too impenetrable. But I could feel them, the presence that had been haunting me for weeks. They were right there, just out of reach, waiting for me to make the first move. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring into the void, too terrified to breathe. And then finally they spoke. "It's time." The voice was low, almost a whisper, but it sent a chill down my spine. I knew what they meant. The game was over. It was time for the final move, but I wasn't ready. I needed more time, more answers. I needed to know why this was happening, who they were, and what they wanted from me. But I didn't get a chance to ask. Before I could say anything, the presence was gone, leaving me alone in the darkness once more. As I sat there, trying to make sense of what had just happened, one thing became clear. Whatever they had planned for me, it was about to happen, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. All I could do was wait, and hope that I could survive whatever came next. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of impending doom. It felt like the final moments before a storm, when the sky turns an unsettling shade of gray and the air is heavy with anticipation. I knew this was it, the end game. Whatever they had been leading me toward, it was about to happen. But I still didn't know what it was, and that uncertainty gnawed at me. I tried to go through my usual routine, but everything felt off. The cabin, once a place of comfort, now seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the trees outside felt like a sign, a countdown to whatever they had planned. I knew I couldn't stay here much longer, but where could I go? They had made it clear that there was no escape. I decided to confront whatever was coming head on. Running had gotten me nowhere, and hiding only made things worse. I had to face this, whatever it was. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to the basement. As I descended the creaky stairs, my heart pounded in my chest. The darkness seemed to close in around me, thick and suffocating, but I kept going, driven by a mix of fear and determination. The small metal door where I'd found the first box was still open, its contents long gone, but something told me that wasn't the end of it. There was something else down here, something I had missed. I searched every corner of the basement, every crack and crevice, but there was nothing, just empty walls and dusty floors. But then, as I was about to give up, I noticed something odd. A small section of the floor that didn't quite match the rest. It was a square panel, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. My heart raced as I knelt down and pried it open. Inside was another box, identical to the first. My hands trembled as I lifted it out, half expecting it to burst into light like the last one. But this time it remained dark and heavy, as if it were holding something much more sinister. I hesitated, my mind racing with possibilities. What could be inside? Another clue, another twisted message. But I knew I had no choice. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the key to everything that had happened. I had to open it. Taking a deep breath, I lifted the lid. Inside was a simple handwritten note, just like the others. But this one was different. The handwriting was neater, more precise, as if whoever wrote it wanted to make sure there was no misunderstanding. "You're almost there," it read. "One last step and it will all be over." I stared at the note, my mind struggling to make sense of it. Almost there? One last step. What did that mean? I turned the note over, searching for more clues, but there was nothing else. Just those cryptic words taunting me with their vagueness. And then I noticed something else. A small key-shaped indentation in the bottom of the box. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what it meant. The key from before, the one that had led me to the first box. It was supposed to go here. I dug through my bag, finding the key buried at the bottom. My hand shook as I inserted it into the indentation, turning it slowly. There was a soft click, and the bottom of the box slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, unassuming object, a USB drive. But this one was different from the last. It was sleek, black, and unmarked, almost as if it was designed to blend in. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at it, knowing that this was the final piece of the puzzle, but I had no idea what I was about to uncover. With trembling hands, I took the drive upstairs and plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered to life and a single file appeared on the desktop, labeled "Final Step." I hesitated, my finger hovering over the trackpad. Part of me wanted to turn back, to throw the drive away and pretend none of this had ever happened, but I knew that wasn't an option. I had to see this through, no matter how terrifying the truth might be. I clicked on the file and a video started playing. The screen was dark at first, but then it flickered, revealing a scene that sent chills down my spine. It was a live feed of my cabin, taken from just outside the front door. The camera slowly panned up, zooming in on the windows, as if searching for something or someone. I felt my breath catch in my throat. This was happening in real time. Whoever was behind this, they were right outside, watching me, just like they had been all along. And then, the camera zoomed in on the basement window, the one I had been standing next to just moments before. I could see myself on the screen, hunched over my laptop watching the video. But what I saw next made my blood run cold. There, just behind me, was a figure, a shadowy silhouette, barely visible in the dim light. It was standing perfectly still, watching me from the doorway. My heart raced as I realized what was happening. They were here, inside the cabin, right behind me. I spun around, my eyes wide with terror. But the doorway was empty. There was no one there. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had seen. Was it real? Or just another trick, another way to mess with my head? I turned back to the screen, but the video had changed. The camera was no longer focused on the cabin. Instead, it showed a dark room filled with rows of computer monitors. Each screen displayed a different location: homes, offices, streets, all with the same eerie, distorted quality. And then, one by one, the screens flickered, revealing something even more terrifying. They were all showing the same thing: me. Every screen was focused on a different moment of my life, all from the past few weeks. I watched in horror as the images flashed by, me at home, at work, in the car, even sleeping. They had been watching me the entire time, recording my every move. And then, the final screen flickered to life, showing a live feed of the very room I was sitting in. My heart pounded as I saw myself on the screen, staring back at the camera with a look of sheer terror. But it wasn't just me on the screen. There was something else. A figure standing in the shadows, just behind me. It was the same figure I had seen before, barely visible but unmistakably there. I felt a cold chill run down my spine as the figure slowly moved closer, stepping out of the shadows and into the light. It was wearing a mask, a blank, featureless face that reflected no emotion. But the eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, were fixed on me, watching my every move. The figure reached out, its hand slowly moving toward my shoulder. I could feel the air around me grow colder. the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. My heart raced as I realized what was about to happen. This was it, the final step. But just as the figure's hand was about to touch me, the screen went black. The video ended, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the darkened screen. For a long moment, I just sat there, my mind reeling. What had I just seen? Was it real, or just another part of their twisted game? I couldn't tell anymore. I couldn't trust my own senses, but one thing was clear. They had won. I was completely at their mercy, trapped in their web with no way out. They had been watching me all along, pulling the strings, guiding me toward this moment. And now that it was over, I was left with nothing. No answers, no closure. Just an overwhelming sense of dread. As I sat there staring at the black screen, I heard a soft, rhythmic tapping. My heart skipped a beat as I realized it was coming from the front door. The same tapping I had heard before, slow and deliberate. I knew what it meant. They were here. And this time, they weren't going to leave until they got what they wanted. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I knew I had to face it. There was no running, no hiding. Whatever came next, I would meet it head on. Slowly, I stood up and walked to the front door. The tapping continued, soft and insistent, like a clock counting down the final moments. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling. I knew this was it, the final step, the end of the game. I didn't know what I would find on the other side, but I was done being afraid. With one last deep breath, I opened the door. But there was nothing there, just the empty porch, the dark woods, and the cold night air. And then, from somewhere deep in the shadows, I heard a voice. A whisper, so soft it was almost lost in the wind. Now you know. I stepped outside, searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing, just the night, still and silent. And that's when I realized the game was over, but the terror wasn't. They had left me with one final gift, the knowledge that they were always watching, always there, just out of sight. No matter where I went, no matter what I did, they would be there, waiting for me to make the next move. Because the truth is, once you've been marked, there's no escape. They find you, they break you, and they leave you with nothing but fear. And no matter how far you run, no matter how well you hide, they will always be one step ahead. So take my advice. Never, ever reveal even the tiniest detail about yourself on the dark web, because once they have that, they have everything, and you'll never be free again. I've always been a bit of a collector. Not in the hoarding sense, but I've got a knack for finding oddities, little things that don't quite fit into the norm. My apartment is filled with all sorts of curiosities. Old vinyl records, vintage posters, and a collection of retro toys that I've picked up over the years. It's a hobby that keeps me occupied, gives me a bit of a thrill when I find something truly unique. I never thought it would land me in the back of a police car, though. It all started on a Saturday afternoon, one of those lazy days where you scroll through online marketplaces looking for nothing in particular. That's when I found it. A listing on a small, obscure website that catered to collectors like me. The item was described as a vintage puzzle cube, but it looked eerily similar to a Rubik's Cube. The colors were slightly off, though, darker, almost murky, and the patterns on the sides seemed more intricate, like they were hiding something beneath the surface. The price was surprisingly low for something that looked so unusual, and I couldn't resist. I clicked Buy Now without a second thought. A few days later, the package arrived. The box was plain, brown, and unmarked, with no return address, nothing out of the ordinary for something purchased from a niche site. I tore it open eagerly, like a kid on Christmas morning, and there it was, the cube. It was heavier than I expected, and the surface felt cold, almost metallic to the touch. The colors were even more unsettling in person, each square shifting slightly as I turned it, as if the hues were alive and reacting to the light. I spent the next few hours fiddling with it, trying to solve it like a normal Rubik's Cube. But this puzzle was different. No matter how I twisted and turned, the colors never aligned in a way that made sense. It was frustrating, yet I couldn't put it down. There was something about it that drew me in, almost like it was challenging me, taunting me to figure it out. As the days passed, I became more obsessed. I started neglecting my usual routines, skipping meals, ignoring calls from friends. I couldn't focus on anything else but the cube. It wasn't long before I noticed something strange happening. The more I worked on the puzzle, the more it seemed to change. The colors grew darker and the patterns became more complex, almost as if the cube was evolving, adapting to my attempts to solve it. Then the nightmares started. At first, they were just vague, unsettling dreams, dark corridors, whispers in a language I couldn't understand, shadows that seemed to move just out of sight. But soon, they became more vivid, more terrifying. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the cube still clutched in my hand, my mind racing with fear. But despite the terror, I couldn't stop. I had to solve it. I needed to. One night, after another restless sleep, I was jolted awake by a loud knock on my door. It was around 3 a.m., and the sound echoed through my small apartment, making my heart race. I stumbled to the door, my mind still foggy from the nightmare I'd just escaped. When I looked through the peephole, I was shocked to see 2 police officers standing outside. "Open up, police!" one of them barked. My heart sank. What could they possibly want? I hadn't done anything wrong, or so I thought. I unlocked the door with trembling hands and cracked it open. "Are you your name?" the officer asked, his tone sharp and serious. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, my voice shaky. "We have a warrant to search your apartment," he said, holding up a piece of paper. My mind raced as I tried to process what was happening. A search warrant? For what? Before I could ask any questions, they pushed past me and started tearing through my belongings. I watched in stunned silence as they rifled through my shelves, my drawers, even my fridge. I kept asking them what they were looking for, but they ignored me, focused on their task. Then one of the officers spotted the cube sitting on my coffee table. His eyes widened, and he quickly called his partner over. "Found it," he said, his voice tense. The other officer nodded, and they both looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe. Anger? I wasn't sure. "What is this about?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The officer who had spoken before grabbed the cube and placed it in a small evidence bag. "You're under arrest," he said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "For what? What did I do?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. He didn't answer, just pulled my hands behind my back and cuffed me. I tried to resist, to ask more questions, but he just pushed me towards the door. As they led me out of my apartment, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the hallway mirror. My face was pale, eyes wide with fear. I didn't recognize myself. As we exited the building, the cold night air hit me like a slap in the face. The flashing lights of the police car illuminated the empty street, making the whole scene feel surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. The officer shoved me into the back seat of the car, and I sat there numb, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What was so special about that cube? Why were the police so interested in it? And most importantly, what was going to happen to me? As the car sped off into the night, my mind raced with questions, but deep down, I had a sinking feeling that I already knew the answer. That cube was no ordinary puzzle, and whatever it was, it had just turned my life into a nightmare. Sitting in that cold, windowless interrogation room felt like an eternity. The walls were a dull gray, and the only sound was the low hum of the fluorescent light above me. My mind was a chaotic mess, racing through 1,000 different scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. What had I gotten myself into? I hadn't been told much since my arrest. After the officers dragged me out of my apartment, they drove me straight to the station. They didn't answer any of my questions, just sat me down in the small room and left me there. The cube, the mysterious Rubik's Cube that had caused all of this, was nowhere to be seen. I stared at the one-way mirror on the wall, knowing someone was probably watching me from the other side, analyzing my every move. The anxiety was unbearable. My thoughts kept drifting back to the cube. What could it possibly be? Why were they so interested in it? The more I thought about it, the less it made sense. It was just a puzzle, or so I had thought. The door finally creaked open, snapping me out of my thoughts. A man in a suit walked in, holding a thick file. He looked like he was in his early 40s, with short-cropped hair and a stern expression that gave nothing away. He didn't introduce himself, didn't even make eye contact as he sat down across from me, placing the file on the table between us. For a moment, he just stared at me as if trying to read my mind. The silence stretched on, making my heart pound even harder. "Do you know why you're here?" he finally asked, his voice calm but cold. "No," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "I have no idea." He raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "Let's start with the cube," he said, opening the file and pulling out a photograph. He slid it across the table, and I recognized it immediately. It was a picture of the cube, the one I had been so obsessed with. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his tone now more demanding. "I bought it online," I said quickly, "from a site that sells collectibles. I didn't think it was anything special, just a weird-looking puzzle." He nodded slowly, as if processing what I was saying, but I could tell he wasn't satisfied with my answer. "This isn't just a puzzle," he said, leaning in closer. "This object, let's just say it's been connected to some very serious incidents. Incidents that involve national security." My heart skipped a beat. National security, what on earth had I stumbled upon? "I don't understand," I stammered. "It's just a cube. How could it be related to anything like that?" "That's what we're trying to determine," he said, his eyes narrowing. "But here's the thing, we've been tracking this object for a while. It's been changing hands for years, always turning up in the wrong places, always bringing trouble with it. The last time it surfaced, it was linked to a major cyber attack on a government facility." I felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me. A cyber attack, government facilities. This was way beyond anything I could have imagined. "But I didn't do anything," I insisted. "I just bought it because it looked interesting. I didn't know." The man held up a hand to stop me. "We're not saying you're involved in anything directly, yet. But the fact that you had this object in your possession raises some very serious questions, and until we get answers, we can't take any chances." He leaned back in his chair, studying me again. "So, here's what's going to happen. We're going to keep you here for a while, ask you some more questions, and run a thorough investigation into your background. If you're telling the truth, you'll be released. But if we find anything suspicious, anything at all, this could become a very different conversation." I was reeling, my mind struggling to keep up with everything he was saying. How had this happened? How had my harmless hobby turned into a nightmare that could potentially ruin my life? "Please," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "I swear, I didn't know anything about this. I'm just a regular guy. I collect things, that's all. There's nothing suspicious about me." "We'll see," the man replied, his tone giving nothing away. "For now, you're staying here. I suggest you think carefully about anything else you might know about that cube, anything you might have noticed that seemed off." He stood up and walked to the door, pausing just before he left the room. "And one more thing," he added without turning around. "If you're holding back any information, now's the time to come clean. It could make all the difference in how this ends for you." With that, he walked out, leaving me alone with my thoughts once again. But now, those thoughts were darker, more terrifying than ever before. National security, cyber attacks, a mysterious object that had somehow ended up in my hands. What was I supposed to do with all this information? I wasn't a criminal. I wasn't involved in anything illegal, and yet here I was being treated like a suspect in something far beyond my understanding. I tried to think back to anything unusual about the cube, but the truth was, everything about it had seemed unusual from the start. The shifting colors, the strange patterns, the way it seemed to change as I worked on it. Could that have been a clue? Was there something hidden within the cube? Something I had unknowingly triggered? I didn't have any answers, only more questions. And as I sat there in that cold, empty room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger, much more dangerous game. A game I had been pulled into without even realizing it. And the worst part was, I had no idea how to get out. I don't know how long I sat in that room after the interrogation. Time seemed to stretch out, each minute dragging by as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The reality of the situation was sinking in deeper with every passing second. I was in serious trouble, and it all revolved around that strange cube. Eventually, another officer came in, this one younger, less intimidating than the man who had questioned me earlier. He handed me a paper cup filled with water and sat down across from me, a sympathetic look on his face. "I'm Officer Davis," he said, his voice softer than I expected. "I know this is a lot to take in, but we need to figure out what's going on with that cube. We're not here to make your life difficult, we just need answers." I nodded, taking a sip of the water, though my hands were still shaking. I told the other guy, "I don't know anything. I bought it online and that's it." Davis nodded, as if he believed me, but there was still a tension in the air, a sense that he was waiting for something more. "Look, I've been doing this job long enough to know when someone's hiding something. I'm not saying you're guilty of anything, but there's more to this story, isn't there? Maybe something you haven't realized yet?" I frowned, trying to think. I'd gone over everything in my head 100 times since they brought me in, but nothing new came to mind. Then, almost as if it had been buried in the back of my mind, a memory surfaced. There was something weird, I admitted slowly, the details coming together as I spoke. When I first got the cube, it looked like a normal puzzle, but the more I worked on it, the more it changed. The colors got darker, and the patterns, they didn't make sense. It was almost like it was reacting to me. Davis leaned in, his eyes narrowing with interest. "Go on. Did you notice anything else? Anything at all?" I hesitated, unsure if what I was about to say would make any sense, but what did I have to lose? At first, I thought it was just me being tired or paranoid, but I started seeing things in the patterns, like symbols or letters, but they were faint, almost hidden. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now... Davis exchanged a glance with someone behind the one-way mirror, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Did you write any of these symbols down, or try to decipher them?" he asked, his voice steady. "No," I replied, shaking my head. "I just thought it was part of the design, maybe some kind of illusion to make the puzzle harder. I didn't think they actually meant anything." He stood up, pacing the small room. "You might not realize it, but you've stumbled onto something very important. Those symbols could be the key to understanding what this cube really is. It's possible that it's more than just a puzzle. It could be a form of communication, something that was never meant to be solved by someone like you." My stomach twisted into knots. This was getting deeper and darker than I'd ever imagined. But what does that mean for me? I didn't ask for any of this. Davis stopped pacing and looked at me with a seriousness that made my heart pound. "It means that you're caught in the middle of something bigger than you realize. If those symbols are part of a code or a message, there's a chance that whoever created this cube will come looking for it. And for you." The air in the room grew heavy with the weight of his words. I felt trapped, like a fly caught in a web with no way out. "So, what do I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. For now, we need to figure out what those symbols mean, Davis said, sitting back down. If we can decode the message, we might be able to understand what this cube is and why it's so important. But I need you to cooperate. Think back to when you were working on the puzzle. Anything that stands out, anything that seemed out of place. I closed my eyes, trying to recall every moment I'd spent with that cube. The hours of frustration, the strange dreams, the feeling that I was being watched. And then something clicked. There was a moment, I began slowly, when I thought I heard a sound coming from the cube. It was faint, like a whisper, but it didn't make any sense. I thought I was imagining it, but now I'm not so sure. Davis leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. What did it sound like? Can you remember? It was like a voice, but not in any language I know, I said, my voice trembling. More like a series of tones or frequencies, like it was trying to communicate something, but in a way that I couldn't understand. He nodded, jotting something down in his notebook. That's important. Very important. It sounds like this cube might have some sort of embedded technology, something designed to transmit information in a way that's beyond our usual comprehension. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a puzzle. It was something far more advanced, something that shouldn't have ended up in my hands. And now I was caught in the middle of a dangerous game, one that I didn't know how to play. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely steady. Davis paused for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. For now, you'll stay here while we analyze the cube. We need to understand what it's doing, and more importantly, who made it. We'll also need to keep you safe. You might not be the only one interested in this thing. The words "keep you safe" didn't bring me any comfort. If anything, they made me even more aware of how dangerous my situation had become. I was just a regular person who had gotten too curious for his own good, and now I was entangled in something that felt like it was spiraling out of control. As Davis left the room, leaving me alone once more, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There was something lurking beneath the surface of this mystery, something dark and unknown. And as much as I wanted to believe that this was all just a terrible mistake, a part of me knew that the cube had brought me here for a reason. But what that reason was, I had no idea. All I knew was that my life would never be the same. The days in the holding cell passed slowly, each one blending into the next. I was kept in a sort of limbo, not quite a prisoner, but definitely not free to leave. The officers treated me well enough, but there was always a sense of distance, as if they knew something about my situation that I didn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not just by the authorities, but by something far more sinister. One afternoon, Officer Davis returned, his expression more serious than before. He had a file in his hands and sat down across from me in the small, bare room where our conversations had become routine. This time, though, there was an urgency in his demeanor that set me on edge. "We've made some progress," he began, flipping open the file. "Our tech team managed to run some tests on the cube. What we found, well, it's not what we expected." I leaned forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean?" Davis took a deep breath before continuing. "The cube isn't just a puzzle. It's a device, an extremely sophisticated one at that. We initially thought it might be some sort of encrypted communication tool, but it's more than that. It's a storage unit of sorts containing data, lots of it. And not just any data, but classified information, the kind that could jeopardize national security if it got into the wrong hands." The room seemed to spin around me as his words sank in. Classified information in a toy-like cube that I had bought on a whim. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. But how did it end up on that website? Why was it sold as just a puzzle? I asked, trying to wrap my head around the implications. "That's where things get complicated," Davis said, his tone grim. "We've traced the origins of the cube back to several places, all dead ends. It seems like whoever designed this thing wanted to keep it off the radar, but here's the kicker. Every person who has come into contact with this cube has either disappeared or met with unfortunate accidents. It's almost as if the cube is cursed. Cursed? I repeated, incredulous. You're saying this thing is responsible for people disappearing? I know it sounds far-fetched, Davis admitted, but there's a pattern we can't ignore. Each time the cube changes hands, something bad happens. It's like the device is a magnet for danger, drawing in trouble wherever it goes. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. So what does that mean for me? Am I next? Davis didn't answer right away, which was more unsettling than if he had. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully. We don't know for sure, but what we do know is that you've been exposed to something highly dangerous, and we need to protect you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metallic object, a key. This is the key to a safe house, he explained. We're moving you there tonight. It's a secure location where you'll be under surveillance, but you'll be safe. We're also bringing in a specialist, someone who might be able to decode the data inside the cube and figure out exactly what we're dealing with. I took the key, my hand trembling slightly as I realized the gravity of the situation. This was real. The danger wasn't just in my head, it was out there, lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. As Davis stood to leave, I couldn't help but ask the question that had been gnawing at me since this all began. Why me? Why did this happen to me? He paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression that was almost pitying. Sometimes people are in the wrong place at the wrong time, but other times, it's like they were meant to find something, like fate has a hand in it. I don't know which is the case for you, but I do know this. You're in it now, whether you want to be or not. With that, he left the room, and I was alone with my thoughts once again. The key felt heavy in my hand, a tangible reminder of the nightmare my life had become. I had no idea what awaited me at this safe house, or if I would ever truly be free from the shadow that the cube had cast over my life. That night, under the cover of darkness, I was escorted to the safe house. It was a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place you'd never look twice at. Inside, it was sparsely furnished but comfortable enough with all the basic necessities. But comfort was the last thing on my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the cube's influence was still out there, drawing unseen eyes to my every move. The specialist arrived the next day. He was an older man, maybe in his late 50s, with graying hair and a serious demeanor. He introduced himself as Dr. Harlan, a cryptography expert who had worked on some of the most complex codes in existence. If anyone could crack the mystery of the cube, it was him. Dr. Harlan wasted no time getting to work. He set up a makeshift lab in one of the rooms, surrounding himself with computers and various tools that I couldn't even begin to understand. I watched from a distance, feeling both hopeful and terrified of what he might find. Hours turned into days as he worked tirelessly, analyzing every aspect of the cube. Every now and then he would mutter something to himself, his brow furrowed in concentration. I didn't dare interrupt him, knowing that whatever he discovered could be the key to understanding why this was happening to me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Harlan called me into the room where he had been working. His face was pale, his eyes darkened by exhaustion, but there was a glint of triumph in his expression. "I've done it," he said, simply holding up the cube. "I've unlocked the code." My heart raced as I approached him, eager to hear what he had discovered. "What does it say? What's inside?" He took a deep breath before answering, his voice tinged with both awe and fear. "The cube contains information, a blueprint to be exact, but it's not just any blueprint. It's a design for a weapon that could potentially alter the balance of power in the world." The room seemed to close in around me as his words sank in. A weapon? That was the last thing I expected to hear. But why would someone hide that in a puzzle cube? And why sell it online? "That's the mystery," Dr. Harlan admitted, placing the cube back on the table. "It's possible that it was hidden in plain sight as a way to keep it safe. to ensure that only the right person would find it. But who that person is, and why they would leave something so dangerous out in the open, is still a question we need to answer. I felt a sense of dread wash over me as the enormity of the situation became clear. This wasn't just a puzzle or a toy. It was something that could change the world, and now it was in the hands of people who might not have the best intentions. "Dr. Harlan," I said, my voice barely steady, "what do we do now?" He looked at me, his expression serious. "We keep this hidden, at least until we can figure out who's behind it and what their true intentions are. But know this, the people who made this cube, the ones who put this information inside, they won't stop until they get it back. And that means you're in more danger than ever." I felt the weight of his words like a stone in my chest. This was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was only just beginning. The cube had drawn me into a web of secrets and danger that I didn't understand. And now I was part of something much bigger than myself. As I left Dr. Harlan's makeshift lab, the key to the safe house still clutched in my hand, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever be free from the shadow of the cube, or if it would consume me, just like it had the others before me. The following days were a blur of tension and uncertainty. I was constantly on edge, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The safe house, which was supposed to be my refuge, felt more like a prison with invisible bars. Dr. Harlan continued his work in secret, trying to piece together the full extent of what we were dealing with. But the more he uncovered, the more it seemed like we were delving into something far beyond our control. One evening, just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Officer Davis returned. His face was more serious than I had ever seen it, and I knew right away that something had shifted. "We need to move you," he said without preamble. "There's been a breach." "A breach?" I echoed, my voice trembling. "What do you mean?" He glanced around the room, as if expecting someone, or something, to be lurking in the shadows. "We've picked up some chatter. Whoever's behind this cube, they've found out where you are. We can't stay here any longer." My heart raced as the reality of the situation hit me. The people who had created the cube, the ones who wanted it back, were closing in. "Where will we go?" "Somewhere more secure," Davis replied, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. "We'll keep you safe, but we need to move now." I didn't have time to argue or question him. Within minutes, I was packed and ready to go, the fear of what might happen next driving me forward. Davis and Dr. Harlan were both tense, their usual calm replaced by a sense of urgency that set my nerves on edge. As we left the safe house under the cover of night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, something unseen and malevolent. The drive was long and silent, the tension in the car palpable. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see headlights following us or shadows moving in the darkness. Eventually, we arrived at a new location, a large, nondescript building that looked like it had been abandoned for years. But as we entered, it became clear that this was no ordinary place. The interior was filled with high-tech equipment, security cameras, and armed guards. Whatever this place was, it was serious. "This is a government safe house," Davis explained as we made our way through the building. "We've got the best security here, and no one will find you." Despite his reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. I followed him and Dr. Harlan deeper into the building, the fluorescent lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. We finally reached a small room that had been set up as a control center. Monitors lined the walls, displaying live feeds from various cameras around the building. Dr. Harlan immediately got to work, connecting the cube to a device that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. "This will help us trace any signals coming from the cube," he explained, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "We need to know who's trying to access it and where they're coming from." I watched in silence, feeling utterly out of my depth. The minutes ticked by as Dr. Harlan worked. the tension in the room growing with each passing second. Finally, he stopped, staring at the screen with a look of disbelief. "What is it?" Davis asked, stepping closer. Dr. Harlan turned to us, his face pale. "The signal isn't coming from outside. It's coming from inside the building." My blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" "It means someone's already here," Davis said, his voice grim. "We've been compromised." Panic set in as the gravity of the situation became clear. Whoever was after the cube wasn't just out there. They were here, inside the very building that was supposed to be our safe haven. "We need to get out," Davis said, already moving toward the door. "Now." But before we could leave, the lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. The only light came from the glow of the monitors, casting eerie shadows across the walls. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Stay calm," Davis replied, though I could hear the fear in his voice. "We're going to get through this." The building's emergency lights flickered on, casting a dim red glow over everything. It was like something out of a nightmare, the kind where you can't wake up no matter how hard you try. Suddenly there was a loud crash from somewhere down the hall, followed by the sound of footsteps. Heavy, purposeful footsteps that were getting closer. "They're here," Dr. Harlan whispered, his face pale in the dim light. Davis pulled out his gun, motioning for us to stay behind him. "Stay quiet and follow me. We need to get to the exit." We moved quickly but cautiously, every sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The footsteps continued to grow louder, echoing off the walls like a countdown to something terrible. As we rounded a corner, we came face to face with a group of men dressed in black, their faces hidden behind masks. They moved with military precision, their weapons trained on us. There was no mistaking their intent. They were here for the cube, and they weren't going to leave without it. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down, the reality of the situation hitting me like a freight train. This was it. This was the end. But then, something strange happened. The cube, which had been silent for so long, began to emit a low hum, a sound that vibrated through the air. The masked men paused, their attention drawn to the cube in Dr. Harlan's hands. The hum grew louder, more intense, until it was almost unbearable. The men began to back away, their faces showing the first signs of fear. And then in an instant, the cube emitted a blinding flash of light, engulfing the room in a brilliance so intense that I had to shield my eyes. When the light faded, the men were gone. Not just gone, but as if they had never been there at all. The hallway was empty, the only sound the faint crackling of the monitors behind us. What just happened?" I stammered, my mind struggling to process what I had just witnessed. Dr. Harlan stared at the cube in his hands, his expression a mixture of awe and horror. The cube, it activated some kind of defense mechanism. It must have detected the threat and neutralized it. "Neutralized?" Davis echoed, looking around in disbelief. "You mean it just made them disappear?" Dr. Harlan nodded slowly, still staring at the cube. "This device is far more advanced than anything we've ever seen. It's not just a weapon. It's a sentient technology, something designed to protect itself at all costs." The implications of his words were staggering. The cube wasn't just a puzzle or a storage device. It was something alive, something with a mind of its own. "We need to get rid of it," I said, my voice trembling. "This thing is too dangerous." But Dr. Harlan shook his head. "We can't just destroy it. We don't know what that might trigger. For now, we need to contain it, keep it safe until we can figure out how to deactivate it permanently." Davis nodded, his face grim. "We'll lock it down in a secure facility. No one can ever know about this." As we made our way back to the control room, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The cube had saved us, but at what cost? How many more lives would be lost because of this strange, dangerous object? Back in the control room, Dr. Harlan sealed the cube in a heavy reinforced container, ensuring that it was completely isolated from any external signals. As the lid closed with a final ominous click, I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality, as if we were sealing away something far more dangerous than we could ever comprehend. "This isn't over," Davis said quietly as we prepared to leave the building. "Whatever this cube is, whatever it's capable of, there are people out there who will stop at nothing to get it. We'll have to stay vigilant, be ready for anything." I nodded, knowing that he was right. My life would never go back to normal. The shadow of the cube would follow me, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked just beneath the surface of our world. As we drove away from the facility, the city lights flickering in the distance, I couldn't help but glance back, half expecting to see those masked men following us, or the cube somehow escaping its containment. But the night was quiet, the road ahead empty. For now, at least, we were safe. But deep down, I knew that the mystery of the cube was far from solved. And I knew, with a sinking feeling, that one day it would come back to haunt me. I've always had a curiosity for the unknown. Not in a thrill-seeker kind of way, no skydiving or base jumping for me, but more in a quiet, obsessive, late-night internet rabbit hole kind of way. You know, the kind of curiosity that keeps you up until 3 a.m., reading conspiracy theories or watching grainy footage of supposed cryptid sightings. That kind of thing. This all started a few months ago, on one of those sleepless nights. I'd just finished reading some article about the Fermi paradox, that whole "where are all the aliens" question. The idea stuck with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. It didn't make sense that the universe could be so vast and yet so eerily silent. So I did what I always do when a question starts bugging me. I went online and started digging. I ended up on this obscure forum where people were discussing extraterrestrial communication. It wasn't the usual tinfoil hat nonsense. These were engineers, linguists, people with PhDs. The conversation was way over my head, but I couldn't stop reading. Someone mentioned something about the Xenotran project, which was supposedly a program developed by some rogue scientist to translate alien languages into human speech. It was nothing more than a whisper, really, but it was enough to pique my interest. The name stuck with me. I started searching for it, but Google didn't turn up anything useful. The more I searched, the more I realized that if this thing existed, it wasn't going to be on the surface web. It took me a while, but I eventually found what I was looking for on a Tor hidden service, a part of the dark web that's only accessible through special software. There was a forum post buried in the archives talking about Xenotran. The post was vague, warning more than encouraging. It had the usual disclaimers about potential legal issues, viruses, and the ever-present threat of, you don't know what you're getting yourself into. But it also had a download link. I hesitated, of course. I wasn't stupid. I knew the risks. But my curiosity got the better of me. I downloaded the file, a small executable with an unassuming name, like something you'd expect from an outdated piece of shareware. After running a scan to make sure it wasn't infected with anything nasty, and double-checking that my VPN was active, I installed it on an old laptop that I didn't use for anything important. The program itself was minimalist to the point of being cryptic. There was no manual, no help file, just a single screen with a microphone icon and a drop-down menu of languages. The options weren't anything you'd recognize, no Spanish, no Mandarin. Instead, there were things like Zeta Reticuli 1, Arcturian, and Proxima b. I almost laughed at how ridiculous it seemed. I mean, really, Zeta Reticuli? That was straight out of every cheesy UFO documentary I'd ever seen. But there was something unsettling about it, too. The drop-down menu was long, much longer than I expected. I scrolled through dozens, maybe hundreds, of supposed alien languages. Each one seemed more bizarre than the last, and at the bottom there was an option that simply said, Auto Detect. I couldn't resist. I clicked Auto Detect, plugged in my microphone, and sat back. For a while, nothing happened. I started to feel foolish, like I'd fallen for some elaborate prank. But then the program sprang to life. The screen flickered and a waveform appeared, pulsing gently. At first, there was just static, a low hum like background radiation. But then I started hearing something else, sounds that didn't belong. It was like a low, rhythmic clicking, almost like Morse code, but not quite. I leaned in closer, straining to make sense of it, but it was just noise. And then the noise changed. The clicks became more complex, forming patterns that seemed deliberate, almost purposeful. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was trying to communicate with me. I laughed it off, but a part of me felt a strange tension, as if something was on the brink of breaking through. The program's interface suddenly flashed, displaying a single word: translating. I stared at the screen, waiting. The clicking noises grew louder, more insistent, until they were practically drilling into my skull. Then, abruptly, the sound cut out, and a robotic voice spoke from my laptop's speakers. "We are here." I froze. The voice was cold, mechanical, but it carried an undeniable sense of presence. It felt as if whatever was speaking was aware of me. I waited, expecting more, but the program went silent. The waveform on the screen flatlined. I tried to shake off the unease that was creeping up on me. I mean, it was just a program, right? A stupid, likely fake program that I'd found on a shady corner of the internet. But still, that voice. I closed the laptop and went to bed, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, that I was overreacting. But as I lay there in the dark, I couldn't get the sound of that voice out of my head. It repeated over and over like a mantra. "We are here." I didn't sleep much that night. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about the program. I kept telling myself that it was all just a joke, some weird art project designed to freak out gullible people like me. But a small, nagging doubt lingered. What if it wasn't? The strangest thing was that I started hearing those clicks again. Faint, almost imperceptible, but definitely there. Sometimes it was when I was alone in my apartment. Other times when I was out for a walk, surrounded by the usual city noise. No matter where I was, if I listened closely enough, I could hear it, like a distant, persistent whisper. I tried to ignore it, but the more I did, the louder it seemed to get. And then one night, I heard the voice again. Only this time it wasn't coming from my laptop. It was coming from right behind me. I didn't turn around right away when I heard the voice. It was late, probably close to 2 a.m., and I was sitting in my living room, mindlessly scrolling through my phone. The sound was faint at first, almost like the soft hum of an old appliance, but then it grew louder. I could feel it in the room, this presence, this awareness. "We are here." The voice was the same as before, cold, mechanical, but this time it wasn't coming from the laptop. It was like the air itself was vibrating with those words. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, but I refused to let myself panic. I had to stay rational, keep my head on straight. I forced myself to turn around, expecting, well, I'm not sure what I was expecting. Maybe to find that the voice had come from something explainable, like a glitching speaker or some electronic device I'd forgotten about. But there was nothing, just the quiet of my apartment, the dim glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just tired. My mind was playing tricks on me, that was all. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I could feel that something was wrong, off in a way I couldn't quite define. For the next few days, I went about my life as usual, trying to push the whole thing out of my mind. I'd go to work, come home, make dinner, watch TV, just the normal, mundane routine. But the sense that something was following me, observing me, never really left. And those clicks, I started hearing them more often and in more places. Not just at home, but at work, in the grocery store, even when I was out with friends. It was like a subtle undercurrent of sound, always present, always just on the edge of my hearing. One night I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. I kept listening for the clicks, half expecting them to start up again, but instead something else happened. I heard a whisper, soft and almost pleading. "Help us." I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. The voice wasn't the same as before. It wasn't that cold, robotic tone I'd heard through the program. This voice sounded human, or at least it tried to. There was a desperation to it, a kind of raw emotion that sent my thoughts spinning. Who was it? What was it? I lay there, frozen, trying to make sense of what I just heard. It had sounded so close, like someone was standing right next to me, begging for help. But when I turned on the light, the room was empty. Just the same four walls, my bed, the dresser, the pile of clothes I kept meaning to put away. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that whoever or whatever had spoken to me was still there, just out of sight. I didn't get any sleep that night. The next morning I was exhausted but determined to figure out what was happening. I fired up the laptop, opened the program, and selected Auto Detect again. The click started up almost immediately, this time more chaotic, more frantic. The waveform on the screen spiked erratically, as if the program was struggling to process whatever it was picking up. And then the translation came through. They can't see us. They must not see us. I stared at the screen, trying to decipher what it meant. Who were they? And why was it so important that they didn't see whatever was speaking to me? The clicks continued, more urgent now, like they were trying to tell me something crucial, something I wasn't understanding. The program flashed again, translating, "You're the key. They will come for you." My breath caught in my throat. This was different from the first message. That had been a simple statement, a declaration of presence. But this was specific, personal, and the implication that something was coming for me, that sent my mind racing in all kinds of directions, none of them good. I didn't know what to do. I tried shutting down the laptop, but the program wouldn't close. The clicks intensified, filling the room, echoing in my head. The voices kept coming through the speakers, overlapping, each one more urgent than the last. "Protect us. Don't trust them. We are many. We are watching." I finally managed to pull the plug, literally yanking the cord out of the wall. The laptop died instantly, and with it, the voices and clicks ceased. But the silence that followed was almost worse, like a heavy weight pressing down on me. I knew I couldn't ignore this anymore. Whatever was happening, it was real, at least real enough to scare the hell out of me. I needed to get out of my apartment, clear my head, figure out what to do next. I packed a bag, planning to stay at a friend's place for a few days. I told myself it was just to get some distance, to think things through. But deep down, I knew I was running. Running from something I didn't understand, something that felt like it was closing in on me. As I left the apartment, I could still feel it, that presence, watching, waiting, and the words kept echoing in my mind. "We are here. Help us. They will come for you." I wasn't sure if I was helping something or putting myself in more danger, but one thing was clear: I was in the middle of something far beyond my understanding. And there was no turning back. I ended up crashing on my friend Mark's couch for the night. I hadn't told him the whole story, just that I needed a break from my apartment, that things were getting weird and I wasn't sleeping well. Mark didn't push too hard. He just handed me a beer and we watched some old horror movies until I felt like I could close my eyes without my mind racing. But even then, sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I was in a fog, running on maybe 3 hours of broken sleep. Mark had already left for work by the time I rolled off the couch. I stood in his living room, trying to shake off the weight of the night before. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, torn between wanting to just go back to my normal life and the nagging feeling that something had changed, something I couldn't ignore. I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. It was still early, the city just waking up, and the air had that crisp, fresh quality that comes before the streets get too crowded. I walked aimlessly for a while, letting the routine of the city ground me. The distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves in the morning breeze, it was all so ordinary, so reassuring. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not with the city, but with me. It was like I was out of sync with everything around me, like I was seeing the world through a filter that I hadn't noticed before. I ended up in a small park, one of those little green spaces tucked between buildings. I sat down on a bench trying to make sense of what had been happening. I replayed the events over and over in my mind, the program, the clicks, the voices. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had to understand what I'd gotten myself into. I couldn't just keep running. I needed answers. The only problem was, I didn't know where to start. I had this program on an old laptop that was now packed away in my bag, but I had no idea what it really was or how it worked. I didn't know if it was some kind of elaborate hoax, or if I had actually tapped into something far beyond human understanding. And if it was real, if those voices were real, what did that mean for me? I was lost in thought when I noticed something strange. Across the park, a man was standing near a tree looking right at me. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring. At first, I tried to ignore it, figuring it was just my nerves getting the better of me. But then I noticed something even stranger. His mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. I watched him for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was almost like he was talking to someone, but there was no one else around, just him, standing there, mouthing words that didn't reach my ears. And then, out of nowhere, I heard it. They know. The voice was faint, almost like a distant echo, but it was unmistakable. It was the same voice I'd heard before, the same robotic tone, but this time it wasn't coming from my laptop. It was coming from somewhere else, somewhere close by. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. The man by the tree was still watching me, his expression blank, his mouth still moving. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the city without a second glance. I was left standing there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I really heard that voice, or was my mind playing tricks on me? And who was that man? Was he somehow connected to all of this, or was I just jumping at shadows? I needed to get out of there. I grabbed my bag and started walking again, my pace quickening as I made my way back to Mark's apartment. The whole time I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that eyes were on me, watching my every move. When I got back to the apartment, I locked the door behind me and took a deep breath. I felt safer there, surrounded by the familiar clutter of Mark's place. But that safety was just an illusion, and I knew it. Whatever was happening, it wasn't something I could escape just by changing locations. I pulled out the laptop and opened it up. I hesitated for a moment before booting it up, but I knew I didn't have a choice. I needed answers, and this was the only way I was going to get them. The program opened up, and as soon as it did, the clicks started again. They were softer this time, more rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. But beneath that calm surface, I could sense something else, something waiting, watching. I clicked on the auto-detect option, and the program immediately began its work. The waveform pulsed on the screen, steady, as the clicks grew louder, more insistent. And then, the translation came through. "We need you." It wasn't a demand, but a statement. A simple, undeniable truth. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to wrap my head around what it meant. What could they possibly need from me? I was just an ordinary person, caught up in something I didn't understand. Before I could process that thought, another message flashed across the screen. "They are coming." My stomach dropped. There it was again, that sense of impending doom. of something closing in on me. I could feel the tension building, the air around me growing heavier with every passing second. And then, without warning, the program shut down. The laptop screen went black, and the room was plunged into silence. I sat there paralyzed, waiting for something to happen. But there was nothing. No clicks, no voices, just the quiet hum of the apartment, the distant sounds of the city outside. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a void that I couldn't see, couldn't understand. And somewhere, deep down, I knew that whatever was coming, it was already too late to stop it. I couldn't stay at Mark's place forever. I couldn't keep running. I needed to face whatever this was, to figure out what was happening and why it was happening to me. But as I sat there in the silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever answers I found, they wouldn't bring me any comfort. They would only bring me closer to the truth, a truth that I wasn't sure I was ready to face. And in the back of my mind, those words kept echoing, a haunting reminder of what was coming. They are coming. I knew I couldn't hide at Mark's place forever. Eventually, I'd have to go back to my own apartment to face whatever it was that had started this whole mess. But the thought of returning there filled me with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. Something had changed, and I could feel it like a storm gathering on the horizon. I just didn't know when or how it would hit. I spent the rest of that day trying to distract myself. Mark came home from work, and we hung out like nothing was wrong, playing video games, ordering pizza, talking about anything and everything except what was really on my mind. I didn't want to drag him into this. Whatever was happening, it was my problem, and I wasn't about to let it spread to anyone else. But even as we laughed and joked, I couldn't escape the sense that I was being watched. It was like a low-level hum, always there, just beneath the surface. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see that man from the park standing outside staring up at us with that blank expression. But there was nothing, just the quiet, ordinary life of the city going on around us. That night, after Mark had gone to bed, I decided to dig deeper. I didn't want to, but I knew I had to. The program on my laptop was the key to all of this, and I had to figure out what it was really doing. I waited until the apartment was silent. Then I pulled out the laptop again. My hands were shaking as I powered it up, but I forced myself to focus. I needed to be clear-headed, rational. When the program loaded, I didn't hit auto-detect right away. Instead, I started poking around, looking for anything that might give me a clue about who had created it and why. But there was nothing. No developer info, no version number, no README file. It was like the program had just materialized out of thin air. Finally, I clicked on Auto Detect. The now familiar click started up again, and the waveform on the screen began to pulse. I watched it, waiting for the translation, for whatever cryptic message would come through this time. But instead of a single translation, the screen started filling with text, faster than I could read. It was like the program was pulling in signals from everywhere, translating them all at once. I tried to keep up, but the messages were coming in too quickly. We see you. They are closer. Prepare yourself. We are afraid. Help us. Do not trust them. The messages overlapped, clashing with one another, creating a cacophony of warnings and pleas. It was overwhelming, like being bombarded with 1,000 voices all at once. I wanted to shut the laptop, to make it stop, but I couldn't. I needed to understand. I needed to know what was happening. Then, amid the chaos, a single message appeared on the screen, larger than the rest, clear and undeniable. You have been chosen. The laptop screen flickered, and the program crashed. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the blank screen, trying to process what I'd just seen. Chosen for what? By whom? I was still reeling when I heard a noise outside the window. It was faint, almost like a soft tapping, but in the dead silence of the night, It was unmistakable. I froze, listening. The tapping continued, steady, rhythmic. I stood up, my heart racing, and moved to the window. I peered out into the darkness, expecting to see something, someone there. But the street below was empty, the city quiet and still. And then I saw it, a shadow barely visible, moving along the edge of the building across the street. It was hard to make out, but there was definitely something there, something that wasn't quite right. It wasn't just the usual play of light and dark. This shadow seemed to move with intent, with purpose. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. What was I seeing? Was it connected to the program, to the voices? I didn't have any answers, but I knew one thing. Whatever that shadow was, it wasn't human. At least not in the way I understood. I tried to calm myself down, to think logically. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or maybe I was so wound up that I was seeing things that weren't really there. But that didn't explain the tapping, the feeling that something was out there, watching me. I shut the laptop, threw on my jacket, and grabbed my bag. I couldn't stay in Mark's apartment any longer. I needed to go back to my own place, to face whatever was waiting for me there. If I stayed, I'd just be dragging Mark into this, and I couldn't do that to him. As I left the apartment, I could feel it again. That presence, that sense of being followed. But this time, it wasn't just a feeling. I knew deep down that something was out there, something that was getting closer with every passing minute. I walked quickly, keeping my head down, trying to blend in with the few people still out on the streets. But no matter how fast I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was closing in on me. By the time I reached my apartment, I was a nervous wreck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. But I finally got the door open and slipped inside, locking it behind me. The familiar surroundings were a comfort, but only a small one. I knew that whatever was happening, I couldn't hide from it anymore. I needed to understand. I needed answers. I set the laptop down on the table, hesitating for a moment before powering it up again. The program loaded without any issues, the screen flickering to life. The clicks started up immediately, more frantic this time, as if they were trying to tell me something urgent. I clicked on Auto Detect once more, and the program sprang into action. The clicks grew louder, more intense, and the waveform on the screen pulsed rapidly. And then, the translation appeared. They are here. My breath caught in my throat. The words hung in the air, heavy with a meaning I couldn't fully grasp. But I knew one thing. They weren't just talking about the program anymore. I slowly turned around, my eyes scanning the room. It was dark, the only light coming from the laptop screen, casting long shadows on the walls. But I could sense it, the presence, the thing that had been following me. And then, from the darkness, I heard the voice again. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was clear, undeniable. And it was coming from right behind me. You are not alone. I froze, too terrified to move, to even breathe. The air around me felt charged, like it was alive, humming with an energy that made my skin crawl. I could feel it now, whatever it was, standing right there, just out of sight. And as I stood there, paralyzed by fear, I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than I could have imagined, and somehow I was at the center of it all. But why? Why me? What had I done to bring this upon myself? The only thing I knew for sure was that whatever this was, it wasn't going to stop. It was only going to get worse, and I had to find out why before it was too late. I stood there frozen, my mind racing, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I knew there was no point. Whatever was happening, it had already found me. Running wouldn't change that. Instead, I forced myself to breathe, to calm down, and to think. I needed to understand this, to face it head on, even if it terrified me. The voice had said I wasn't alone. It wasn't a threat, but more of a statement, as if whatever was speaking was trying to reassure me, or warn me. The presence in the room was unmistakable now, like a pressure in the air, heavy and oppressive. I could feel it around me, surrounding me. I slowly turned back to the laptop, half expecting to see something, anything, materialize on the screen, some explanation that would make all of this make sense. But the screen was blank, the program silent. The clicks had stopped, leaving only the sound of my own breathing echoing in the room. But then, just as I was about to close the laptop, a new message appeared on the screen, one that made my heart skip a beat. "We are with you." There was something different about this message. It wasn't like the others. It wasn't a warning or a command. It felt almost comforting, like whoever or whatever was sending these messages was trying to reach out to me, to connect with me in some way. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it all. The voices, the clicks, the strange presence that seemed to follow me, they weren't just random. They were connected, all part of something larger, something that was happening right here, right now. But the question that kept nagging at me was, why me? What made me so special? Why had I been chosen for this? And most importantly, what was this? I thought back to the first time I'd run the program, to the initial message that had sent chills down my spine. We are here. At the time, I'd taken it as a simple statement, a declaration of presence. But now, I was starting to realize that it meant so much more. These voices, these beings, whatever they weren't just here, as in nearby. They were here, in my world, in my life. They had always been here, just out of sight, just beyond the reach of ordinary human perception. And somehow, through that program, I had tapped into their frequency, opened a door that had been closed for who knows how long. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. As I sat there trying to process everything, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a soft, low hum, almost like the sound of an electrical current, but deeper, more resonant. It was coming from somewhere in the apartment, but I couldn't tell where. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding, and moved toward the sound. It seemed to be coming from the corner of the room, near the window. The closer I got, the louder the hum became, until it was vibrating in my bones, filling my entire body with an odd, tingling sensation. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the hum stopped. The apartment fell silent again. But this time, the silence was different. It wasn't just an absence of sound. It was an absence of everything. The air felt thick, heavy, like I was underwater, struggling to breathe. And then I saw it. In the corner of the room, near the window, the shadows began to shift. They moved slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. But then they began to take shape, forming something that made my mind reel. It wasn't a person, not in the way we understand. It was more like a distortion, a ripple in the fabric of reality itself, something that shouldn't exist in our world. But it was there, standing in my apartment, watching me. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, every muscle in my body locked in place. The figure, or whatever it was, seemed to study me, as if it were just as curious about me as I was about it. There was no malice in its presence, no threat, just a deep, abiding sense of connection. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it began to dissolve, fading back into the shadows, leaving me standing there alone once more. The hum had stopped, the air had cleared, and the apartment was just as it had always been, silent, empty. I stood there for a long time, trying to understand what had just happened, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make sense of it. All I knew was that whatever it was real, and it wasn't going away. I went back to the laptop, my hands trembling as I opened the program again. I needed to know more, to find out what was happening to me and why. The program loaded, and the clicks started up again, softer this time, almost like a whisper. The translation appeared on the screen, simple and direct. You are ready. Ready for what? I had no idea, but I knew deep down that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning, the first step into something far larger than myself, something that I couldn't turn away from, no matter how much I wanted to. I closed the laptop and sat back, letting the silence wash over me. The presence in the room was gone, but I could still feel it, like a faint echo in the back of my mind, always there, always watching. I didn't know what would happen next or where this would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same again. And as I sat there, alone in the dark, I realized that maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. I've always been one of those people who dabbles in the strange and unexplained, not necessarily because I believe in all of it, but because it's fascinating. You know the type: late-night YouTube binges on conspiracy theories, ghost stories, and occasionally the darker corners of the internet. But the night I stumbled upon that forum, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I'd heard of the dark web before, of course. Who hasn't? But I never really ventured into it. It always seemed like something that was more trouble than it was worth, filled with scammers, hackers, and God knows what else. But curiosity got the better of me one night after I'd had a few too many beers and was feeling particularly invincible. I found myself on Reddit, reading through a thread about the weirdest things people had found on the dark web. The stories were a mix of laughable and terrifying, but one caught my eye in particular. Someone mentioned a forum dedicated to alien abductions. Now, I'm not some UFO nut. I've watched a few documentaries and read some books, but I've always approached the subject with a healthy dose of skepticism. Still, there was something about the idea of a forum where people supposedly shared their own abduction experiences that piqued my interest. Maybe it was the beers, or maybe it was just boredom, but I decided to dig a little deeper. The original commenter hadn't provided any links, obviously, but after a bit of creative Googling and a couple of rabbit holes later, I found a reference to a dark web forum called The Light Seekers. The name was vague enough to be intriguing, and after reading through a few posts about it on some sketchy websites, I decided to give it a try. Accessing the dark web was easier than I'd expected, honestly almost disappointingly so. It didn't take long before I was staring at a plain black screen with white text that simply read, "Welcome, Seeker of the Truth." There was an option to register and another to browse as a guest. Feeling cautious, I chose the guest option. The forum itself was minimalist, almost sterile. There were no ads, no flashy graphics, just text and the occasional low-res image. The categories were all related to alien phenomena, abductions, sightings, communication, and evidence. Each section had hundreds of threads, some with thousands of replies. The posts were detailed, and some were clearly written by people who were either deeply paranoid or disturbingly sincere. Either way, the stories were gripping. I started with the abduction section, skimming through the titles until one caught my eye. They took me last night. Again. The post was long, written in frantic, almost incoherent sentences. The author, who went by the handle Lost in Light, described waking up in their bed with the distinct sensation of not being alone. They couldn't move or speak, a classic sleep paralysis scenario. But then they started describing things that didn't quite fit. Strange lights filtering through the blinds, a low humming sound that seemed to reverberate inside their skull. And then, most disturbingly, a memory of floating through the air. The post ended abruptly, with the author stating that they felt them coming back and had to go. The comments were a mix of support, skepticism, and the occasional troll. But what struck me was how many people seemed to have similar experiences. And these weren't just the usual "I saw a UFO once" stories. These were detailed accounts of being taken, examined, and then returned with no memory of how they got back home. I spent hours reading through the threads, the initial thrill giving way to a deep unease. It wasn't the stories themselves that bothered me. Like I said, I'm a skeptic. It was the consistency. There were patterns, recurring details that cropped up in post after post, often from users who had never interacted with each other. The same bright lights, the same humming sound, the same sensation of being watched. Scratch that, being observed. I don't know when it happened, but at some point, I found myself reading these accounts with a different mindset. What if, just what if, these people were telling the truth? What if, after all these years of rolling my eyes at UFO nuts, there was something real happening here? The thought was absurd, but it gnawed at me, especially as the night wore on. Eventually, I stumbled upon a post in the communication section that really made me stop. The title was simple: "If you're reading this, they're watching." The author, another anonymous user, claimed that the forum wasn't just a place for people to share their stories, but a kind of hunting ground. According to them, the aliens, or whatever they were, used the forum to monitor those who were aware of them, who had been touched by them in some way. The more you engaged, the more likely you were to become a target. The post ended with a chilling warning: stop reading, stop posting, don't let them know you know. I closed my laptop after that. It was late, and I was starting to feel a little too paranoid for my own good. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd opened a door that should have stayed closed. Still, I managed to convince myself that it was all nonsense, just a bunch of people feeding off each other's delusions. That's when the strange things started happening. It was subtle at first. My phone would act up, freezing or restarting for no reason. I'd lose track of time, finding hours had passed in what felt like minutes. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain I'd heard something, only to find my room silent and empty. But it wasn't until the incident with the light that I really started to worry. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed a faint light coming from my window. At first, I thought it was just a street light or maybe a passing car, but the light didn't move. It stayed there, hovering just outside my window, growing brighter. I got up to check, and as I pulled back the curtain, the light disappeared, leaving me staring at nothing but darkness. I laughed it off, telling myself I'd just imagined it, but deep down, I knew something was off. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the next day, the light was back, this time in broad daylight, and this time, it didn't go away when I looked. It's been a week since I found that forum, and the strange occurrences haven't stopped. If anything, they've gotten worse. I haven't gone back to the Light Seekers since that first night, but I can't help but feel like something from there has found me. I know it sounds crazy, and maybe it is, but I'm starting to wonder if those warnings weren't just paranoid ramblings. What if they were real? I tried to carry on with my life as if nothing had happened, but the more I tried to ignore it, the more persistent the strange occurrences became. It was like a snowball effect. The small things started adding up, and before long, they were impossible to dismiss. The light outside my window was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I started noticing other things that were off. I'd hear faint noises in the middle of the night, like a low hum or a distant whisper, just on the edge of perception. I live alone, so any noise at night is usually easy to pinpoint, but these sounds seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Then there was the electricity. My lights would flicker at random intervals, not just in one room but throughout the entire house. Sometimes my electronics would act up too. My TV would turn on by itself, the screen showing nothing but static before shutting off again. I've checked the wiring, even called an electrician, but nothing's wrong with the house. Whatever this is, it isn't technical. The worst part is the dreams, or at least, I think they're dreams. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, with only the vaguest recollection of what had happened. I'd remember flashes, bright lights, a cold, sterile room, figures standing over me, their faces obscured by shadows. Every time I'd wake up convinced that something had been in my room, something that wasn't supposed to be there. It was around this time that I started to lose track of time, not in the usual "where did the day go" kind of way, but in a more disturbing, disorienting sense. I'd look at the clock, then back down at what I was doing, only to realize that hours had passed without me noticing. Once, I went to bed at what I thought was midnight, only to wake up and find it was already afternoon. My entire routine has been thrown off and I'm constantly exhausted, but no matter how much I sleep, it doesn't seem to help. It wasn't until the missing time episode started that I began to seriously panic. I was driving home from work one evening, the sun just starting to dip below the horizon. The drive should have taken 20 minutes, but when I pulled into my driveway, the clock in my car read 2 hours later. I had no memory of where I'd been or what I'd done during that time. It was as if I'd blacked out, but without the usual disorientation that comes afterward. I felt fine, except for the gnawing anxiety that something had happened, something I couldn't remember. I've also started noticing strange marks on my body, small circular bruises, almost like puncture marks, that appear overnight. They don't hurt, and they're not in places I could have injured by accident. I've found them on my arms, legs, even the back of my neck. They're faint, barely noticeable, but once you see them, it's hard to unsee. I've checked my bed for anything that could be causing them, but there's nothing there. My friends have noticed that something's up too. They've commented on how tired I look, how distracted I seem, but I can't exactly tell them the truth. How do you explain to someone that you think you're being targeted by something out of a sci-fi movie? They'd think I was losing my mind, or worse, they'd try to help, and I can't drag anyone else into this. Whatever's happening, it's my problem to deal with. In a desperate attempt to understand what's happening, I've started researching more about alien abductions. Real research this time, not just dabbling in conspiracy theories for fun. The more I read, the more disturbing the similarities between my experiences and the stories of others become. The missing time, the unexplained marks, the strange lights, they're all classic signs of abduction, according to the so-called experts. I'm starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, there's something to all this. But even as I type those words, it feels ridiculous. I'm a rational person, or at least I thought I was. But how do you stay rational when the world around you stops making sense? The final straw came last night. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, when I heard the sound of footsteps outside my window. My bedroom is on the second floor, so there's no way it could have been someone walking by. But the sound was unmistakable. Slow, deliberate steps, as if someone was pacing just outside the glass. I froze, straining to listen, but after a few seconds, the footsteps stopped, and all I could hear was my own ragged breathing. I don't know how long I lay there, too terrified to move, but eventually exhaustion took over, and I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up this morning, everything seemed normal. No strange marks, no missing time, but the memory of those footsteps lingers. I'm starting to wonder if this is how it begins for everyone who's posted on that forum. Small things at first, easily dismissed until they're too obvious to ignore. I don't want to go back to the light seekers, but part of me feels like I need to. Maybe if I can find someone who's gone through the same thing, I can figure out what's happening to me. Maybe there's a way to stop it before it gets any worse. Or maybe I'm already too late. For now, I'm trying to keep my head down, trying to convince myself that I'm imagining things, that all of this is just a series of coincidences. But I can't shake the feeling that I've attracted the attention of something far beyond my understanding, something that isn't going to let me go so easily. And the scariest part, I have no idea what's coming next. I've been trying to keep my life as normal as possible, but normal doesn't seem to exist anymore. The weirdness has become a constant presence, lurking in the background of every waking moment, and no matter how hard I try to ignore it, it just keeps getting worse. A few days after the incident with the footsteps, I noticed something strange on my phone. It started with a small, almost imperceptible glitch. My screen would flicker for a split second whenever I opened certain apps, like my camera or notes. At first, I brushed it off as just another tech issue, maybe a bug that needed fixing. But then I started noticing other things, like how my phone would get unusually warm, even when I wasn't using it. I'm not talking about the typical overheating that happens when you've been streaming videos or playing games for hours. This was different, almost like it was processing something heavy in the background. Then one night, while I was scrolling through my photos, I found a picture I didn't remember taking. It was of my bedroom, taken from the foot of my bed. The angle was odd, almost as if someone had been standing there, watching me sleep. My bed was empty in the photo, and the room was dimly lit by the soft glow of my nightlight, the one I always keep on to fend off the darkness that feels a little too oppressive these days. I deleted the photo immediately, telling myself it must have been a glitch, some accidental screenshot or a weird camera error. But the unease it left behind didn't go away. In fact, it only grew stronger the more I thought about it. I started checking my phone constantly, scanning through my gallery for any other anomalies, but nothing else seemed out of place. But then, the messages started. It began with a notification from an unknown number, just a single word, "Stop." I stared at the message for a long time, my mind racing through the possibilities. A prank? Spam? But the timing was too perfect, too coincidental to be random. I tried to trace the number, but it was unlisted, and attempts to call it back only resulted in a disconnected tone. The messages continued over the next few days. They were sporadic, often arriving late at night when I was lying in bed, struggling to fall asleep. Sometimes they'd say things like, "Don't go back," or "They're watching." Other times they'd be more cryptic, like "The light knows," or "You can't hide." The more I tried to ignore them, the more frequent they became, each one sending a fresh wave of dread through me. I considered going to the police, but what could I say? That I was getting creepy text messages and seeing weird lights outside my window. I'd sound insane, and even if they did take me seriously, what could they do? The messages were coming from nowhere, and I had no proof of anything else that was happening. It would just be my word against an invisible, unknowable threat. I finally decided to shut my phone off for a while, hoping that cutting off communication might make things stop. It didn't. If anything, it made them worse. The night after I powered down my phone, I woke up to the sound of my front door creaking open. My heart pounded as I lay there, straining to hear anything else. The house was silent, too silent, like it was holding its breath. I knew I had locked the door before bed, checked it twice in fact. I wanted to stay in bed, convince myself that it was just the wind, but something told me I needed to go check. I grabbed a baseball bat from under my bed, a relic from my high school days, and slowly made my way downstairs. The house felt different in the dark, the shadows deeper, more menacing, as if they were hiding something just out of sight. When I reached the door, I found it slightly ajar. My breath caught in my throat. I pushed it open fully, stepping out onto the porch. The night was eerily quiet, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows on the pavement. I didn't see anyone, didn't hear anything unusual, but the air felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. As I turned to go back inside, I noticed something on the doormat, a small metallic object glinting in the dim light. I bent down to pick it up, turning it over in my hand. It was a key, an old rusted one with a tag attached that simply read, "Home." I had never seen it before and had no idea what it was supposed to unlock. I took the key inside, locking the door behind me and double-checking all the windows. The key felt wrong in my hand, like it was radiating an energy I couldn't quite explain. I didn't know what to do with it, so I ended up placing it in a drawer in the kitchen, telling myself I'd figure it out later. That night I didn't sleep. I sat up in bed, clutching the baseball bat, listening to every creak and groan the house made, convinced that at any moment something would come through that door. But nothing did. The night passed in agonizing silence, and when dawn finally broke, I was left with nothing but exhaustion and a sense of impending doom. The next morning, I powered my phone back on, half expecting another message to be waiting for me. But there was nothing. No new texts, no missed calls, just the usual notifications from apps I hadn't touched in days. For a moment, I let myself hope that maybe it was over, that whatever had been tormenting me had finally given up. But that hope was shattered when I opened my email. Sitting at the top of my inbox was a new message from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "Do you understand now?" My hands trembled as I clicked on it, dreading what I might find. The email contained only one sentence: "They're closer than you think." And attached to it was a photo, another image of my bedroom, taken from the exact same angle as the one I'd found on my phone. Only this time, I was in the bed, asleep, with a figure standing at the foot of it. The figure was tall, with long limbs, and its face was completely featureless, just a blank, smooth surface. I don't remember much of what happened after that. I think I might have blacked out, or maybe I just blocked it from my memory. All I know is that when I came to, I was sitting on the floor, my back against the wall, clutching my phone like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I've been trying to convince myself that it's all some elaborate prank, that someone is messing with me, but deep down, I know that's not true. The figure in that photo wasn't human. I don't know what it was, but I know it's connected to everything that's been happening. And I'm terrified that whatever it is, it's not done with me yet. I keep telling myself that I need to leave, to get out of this house and go somewhere safe. But where would I go? I don't think this thing is bound by distance. I think it's something that's attached to me, that's been watching me ever since I found that forum. I haven't gone back to the Light Seeker since that first night, but I've been thinking about it more and more. Maybe if I go back, I can find some answers. Maybe there's something there that can help me understand what's happening, or at the very least, prepare me for what's to come. But there's a part of me that's scared to even open that door again. What if going back makes things worse? What if it draws them closer? What if the only way to stay safe is to stop searching for answers and just accept that some things are better left unknown? For now, I'm stuck in a state of limbo, too afraid to move forward, too terrified to stay where I am. And all the while I can feel it. The unseen observer, watching, waiting for the right moment to make its move. I just don't know what that moment will be, and I'm not sure I want to find out. I've been living on the edge of panic for what feels like an eternity now. The days blur together, a monotonous stretch of waiting for the next strange occurrence, the next inexplicable event that will push me further into the abyss. Sleep has become a distant memory, and when I do manage to close my eyes, I'm plagued by nightmares that leave me drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The email with that photo, that faceless figure standing at the foot of my bed, was the tipping point. I haven't been able to look at my bedroom the same way since. Every time I walk past it, I expect to see that figure again, just standing there, waiting for me. I've started sleeping on the couch, keeping the TV on all night to drown out the silence, but it doesn't help. The noise is just another reminder that I'm not really alone, that something is lurking in the background, just out of sight. I've thought about telling someone, my friends, my family, but every time I pick up the phone, I hesitate. What could I possibly say that wouldn't make me sound completely unhinged? Hey, I think I'm being stalked by aliens from a dark web forum. Yeah, that would go over well. They'd probably have me committed, and maybe they'd be right to. But deep down, I know that's not the solution. I know that whatever this is, it's beyond the reach of any conventional help. My only solace has been in trying to understand what's happening, but the more I dig, the more questions I uncover. I've started reading books on alien abductions, combing through online articles, and watching every documentary I can find. It's all starting to blend together, accounts of strange lights, missing time, unexplained marks. All of it eerily similar to what I've been experiencing. But there's one thing that keeps coming up. One detail that sends a shiver down my spine every time I come across it. The Watchers. In almost every account there's mention of them. beings that observe from the shadows, silent and unblinking, waiting for the right moment to strike. They're described as emotionless, with an intense focus on their targets, as if they're studying them. The idea that I'm being watched, monitored by something that sees me as nothing more than a specimen, is horrifying. But it's the only explanation that makes sense. I've started noticing other things too. Things I would have dismissed as paranoia a few weeks ago. Like the man who's been parked outside my house every night, sitting in his car with the engine idling, never getting out, just watching. I've tried to approach him a few times, but he always drives off the moment I step outside, disappearing into the darkness before I can get close enough to see his face. Then there's the feeling I get when I'm in public, like I'm being followed. I'll catch glimpses of people in my peripheral vision, people who seem to vanish the moment I turn to look at them. It's like they're shadows, there one moment and gone the next, leaving me questioning whether they were ever real in the first place. I've become hyper-aware of everything around me, jumping at the slightest noise, scanning every room I enter for anything out of place. I've even taken to checking my locks multiple times a night, making sure every window is secured, every door bolted shut. But it doesn't help. Nothing feels safe anymore. The other night, I had what I can only describe as an episode. I was sitting on the couch trying to lose myself in a TV show when the power suddenly cut out. The entire house was plunged into darkness and the only sound was the low hum that's become all too familiar. It was so loud, vibrating through my bones, making it impossible to think. And then in the darkness I saw it, a faint glow coming from the kitchen like the light from a cell phone. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, straining to see what was causing it. The glow grew brighter, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow pass through it like someone or something was standing just out of sight. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed with fear, but eventually the lights flickered back on and the hum stopped. The glow was gone, and when I finally gathered the courage to check the kitchen, I found nothing. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. No sign of anyone having been there. But that didn't stop the terror from gripping me. I spent the rest of the night pacing the house, checking every corner, every inch of space, convinced that something was hiding, waiting for me to let my guard down. By the time morning came, I was a wreck, my nerves frayed and my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't control. I've stopped going to work. I can't concentrate on anything anymore, and the thought of leaving the house, of exposing myself to whatever might be out there, fills me with dread. My boss has been surprisingly understanding, chalking it up to burnout. But I know I can't keep this up for much longer. Sooner or later, I'm going to have to face the reality of what's happening, or risk losing everything. In a moment of desperation, I decided to go back to the Light Seekers. I'd promised myself I wouldn't, but I needed answers, and there was no other place to turn. When I logged in, the forum looked the same as it did before, plain, minimalist, and eerily silent. I scrolled through the threads looking for anything that might help me, but most of the recent posts were from new users, sharing their own experiences, none of which were close to what I was dealing with. It wasn't until I reached the older threads that I found something. It was a post titled "The Ones Who Watch," written by a user named Ghost in the Machine. The post was long, detailing their experiences with the Watchers, beings that followed them, observed them, and ultimately took them. The descriptions were unnervingly similar to what I'd been experiencing: the lights, the strange figures, the sense of being followed. The post ended with a chilling statement. Once they've chosen you, there's no escape. They'll keep watching until the time is right, and then they'll take you. But there was something else, something I hadn't seen before. In the comments, another user had posted a link, along with a cryptic message. "This might help you understand." Against my better judgment, I clicked on it, and it took me to a page on the dark web that I hadn't seen before. The page was different from the forum. No discussion threads or user posts, just a series of files, each labeled with a date and a cryptic title. I downloaded one at random, and when I opened it, I was met with a series of photos, grainy, low-quality images of people in various states of distress. Some were in their homes, others on the street, but all of them had the same terrified expression, as if they knew they were being watched. As I scrolled through the images, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the photos was of me, taken from the same angle as the one I'd found on my phone. I was asleep, just like before, but this time the figure was closer, almost leaning over me, its featureless face inches from mine. I slammed my laptop shut, my mind racing with the implications. These weren't just random abduction stories, they were evidence, documentation of people being taken, observed, and eventually disappearing. And now, I was one of them. I've been trying to stay calm, trying to figure out what to do next, but I'm running out of options. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, how much longer I can keep pretending that everything's going to be okay. Because the truth is, I'm not sure it is. I've considered leaving, packing up and running, but where would I go? They've already found me here, and if the stories are true, they'll just find me again. The Watchers aren't bound by distance, by walls or locks. There's something else entirely, something beyond my understanding. For now, I'm stuck in this nightmare, waiting for whatever comes next. I don't know what they want or why they've chosen me, but I'm terrified that I'm running out of time. And the worst part is I don't know how to stop it. All I can do is wait and hope that maybe, just maybe, there's still a way out. But deep down, I'm starting to fear that there isn't. I've reached a point where everything feels like it's spiraling out of control. The fear, the paranoia, the constant sense of being watched. It's all consuming me, turning my life into something unrecognizable. I've barely eaten in days, and sleep is no longer an option. Every time I close my eyes, I see that faceless figure standing over me, waiting. I don't know how much more of this I can take. After finding that photo of myself on the dark web, I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer. It's like the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me with the weight of everything I've uncovered. So I did the only thing I could think of. I left. I packed a small bag with the essentials, some clothes, my laptop, and my phone, and I drove. I didn't have a destination in mind, just the overwhelming need to get as far away as possible. For hours, I drove aimlessly, the landscape outside my window blurring into a mix of colors and shadows. I didn't stop, didn't allow myself to think. I just kept driving, hoping that somehow I could outrun whatever was coming for me. But as the sun began to set, the reality of my situation hit me hard. I couldn't keep running forever. They'd find me no matter where I went. I eventually pulled into a small, run-down motel off the highway, the kind of place where no one asks questions. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting a sickly yellow light over the parking lot. It was the perfect place to hide, at least for a little while. The room was as dingy as I expected. Faded wallpaper, a lumpy bed, and a small TV that only played static. But it didn't matter. I wasn't planning on staying long. I just needed a place to regroup, to figure out my next move. I set up my laptop on the small desk by the window, the same window I made sure to cover with the threadbare curtains. I couldn't risk anyone, or anything, seeing inside. My hands shook as I powered it on, the blue light from the screen casting an eerie glow in the dim room. I hesitated before going back to the Lightseekers forum, but I needed answers. There had to be something, some clue that could help me understand what was happening, or at least prepare me for what was coming. As soon as I logged in, I noticed a new message waiting for me, sent by an admin I hadn't seen before. The subject line read, "Final warning." My pulse quickened as I clicked on it. The message was short, just a few lines of text. "You've gone too far. Stop searching or you'll end up like the others. This is your last chance." The words sent a shiver down my spine. The tone was different from the other warnings I'd received, more direct, more threatening. But it wasn't just a scare tactic. It felt like a genuine ultimatum. I knew I should heed the warning, but something in me couldn't let go. I had to know the truth, even if it meant putting myself in more danger. I replied to the message, typing out a single question: "Who are you?" I didn't expect a response, but I needed to try. I needed to know who was behind this, who had been pulling the strings, monitoring me from the shadows. But as soon as I hit send, the screen flickered and the forum went blank. The entire site had been taken down just like that. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the empty screen, wondering what had just happened. Had they finally shut me out for good? Or was this just another part of their game, a way to isolate me even further? Then, as if in answer to my unspoken question, my laptop pinged with a new email notification. It was from the same untraceable address that had sent me the previous photos, but this time there was no subject line, no cryptic message, just a video file, simply titled, "Watch." Against every instinct screaming at me to stop, I clicked on it. The video was shaky, clearly recorded on a phone, and it began with someone walking down a dark, narrow corridor. The walls were plain, industrial-looking, like the inside of an old warehouse. The only sound was the person's breathing, heavy and erratic, as they moved deeper into the building. The camera turned a corner, revealing a large, open space filled with rows of metal tables. Each table had something lying on it, covered with a white sheet. The person recording the video approached one of the tables, their hand trembling as they reached out to pull the sheet back. What I saw next made my stomach turn. Underneath the sheet was a person, unconscious, strapped to the table with thick leather restraints. Their face was pale, almost gray, with dark circles under their eyes, as if they'd been drained of life. And then, as the camera moved closer, I realized with a jolt of horror that the person lying on the table was me. The camera lingered on my lifeless face for a moment before it panned to the side, revealing something even more disturbing. Standing in the shadows, just out of view, were several figures, tall, with long limbs and blank, featureless faces. They were watching, observing, just like the stories had said. The video cut off abruptly, leaving me staring at the black screen in disbelief. I felt like I was going to be sick. It wasn't just a threat or a warning anymore. It was a confirmation. They had me, or they would have me soon. Everything I'd been experiencing, all the strange occurrences, the missing time, the marks on my body, it was all leading to this moment. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to move, had to get as far away as possible. Even though I knew deep down it wouldn't make a difference, they were already too close. In a frenzy, I grabbed my bag and threw it over my shoulder, practically running out of the motel room and into the night. The air was cold, biting, but I barely noticed as I fumbled with my car keys, desperate to get out of there. I was about to climb into the driver's seat when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, a faint light glowing in the distance just beyond the trees that bordered the motel. It was the same light I'd seen outside my window all those nights ago, the same light that had started everything. But now it was closer, almost beckoning me, like it was drawing me in. I should have driven away, should have ignored it and kept running. But something compelled me to follow it, like I was no longer in control of my own actions. I stepped away from the car, my feet moving on their own, leading me toward the light. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting into unnatural shapes as I moved deeper into the woods. The light grew brighter with each step until it was all I could see, all I could focus on. And then, suddenly, I was there, in the clearing, surrounded by the same humming noise that had haunted me for weeks. The light was blinding now, so bright that I had to shield my eyes, but I couldn't turn away. I knew that whatever was happening, it was inevitable. There was no escape. As the light engulfed me, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, like all my fear, all my anxiety had been lifted. I was weightless, floating, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was at peace. The last thing I remember is the light fading, replaced by darkness, and the sensation of being watched, observed by unseen eyes. But this time I wasn't afraid. I understood now. I was one of them, one of the lost souls taken by the Watchers, drawn into their world, never to return. And as I drifted into the void, I knew that this was my fate. There was no escaping it, no running from it. It was always meant to be. I was theirs now, and there was nothing left to do but surrender to the unknown.